Chapter 428. As she spoke, Helian Wei did not look at the two people whose faces had suddenly turned pale. Instead, she lowered her eyes and stroked little Seven's head. Go and invite Madame Liao over. I'll give her a gift so that she can recognize someone. There's no need for the seventh prince to make an extra trip. A confident female voice came from the crowd, with the unique fire of a middle-aged woman. Princess, please continue, I can hear everything. Helian Wei raised her eyes and looked at the figure. Her voice was faint as she said, since Madame Liao is here too, then I will say whatever I want to say. I have a few letters here that clearly state what Liao Wuliang and Helian Jiao have been doing for the past 2 days. Both of them are in love and both of them are very happy. When Helian Vivian spoke until here, everyone had already understood. Their gazes shifted to Helian Jiao, full of contempt and ridicule. I didn't expect Helian Jiao to be this kind of person. God, that Liao Wuliang is more than 10 years older than her. More than 10 years older, don't forget, Liao and Helian Jiao studied under the same master. Usually when Helian Jiao sees Liao Wuliang, she has to call him uncle. I didn't expect the two of them to be together, it's disgusting. I've never seen such a despicable woman. That man is not a good person either. Madame Liao listened to the words around her. She couldn't bear it anymore. She had a bad temper. When she was with Liao Wuliang, it was because she liked him and her family was powerful that the two of them got together. For so many years, Liao Wuliang was able to get to where he was today because of her family's help. She did not expect that he dared to do such a dirty thing behind her back. More importantly, the other party was the Helian Jiao whom she had watched grow up. Thinking of this, Madame Liao's body shook violently. She didn't look at the letter in Helian Vivian's hand and rushed directly to Helian Jiao. Madame Liao reached out and grabbed Helian Jiao's hair, pulling it hard. Are you shameless? Is that what your mother taught you? Who told you to go around seducing men? It hurts. Let go of me. Helian Jiao just wanted to find a hole and hide in it. She never thought that Helian Vivian would know about her relationship with Liao Wuliang, and even announced it in such a way. A great sense of panic overwhelmed her. What should she do in the future? How was she supposed to get married? Even if she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix girl, who would marry her? Thinking of this, the Helian Jiao struggled even harder. Without thinking, she retaliated, I told you to let go of me. Didn't you hear me? Helian Vivian, you've wronged me. You're spreading rumors about me. You just can't bear to see me doing well. If you have the ability, then pull this shrew away from me. Let's face each other. Who are you calling a shrew, you little bitch? When Madame Liao heard Helian Jiao's words, she exerted even more strength in her hands. She pulled a handful of her hair off. Helian Jiao was in extreme pain. She directly used all of her martial qi and kicked her to the ground. Madame Liao was in pain. She clutched her stomach and fell to the ground, crying and screaming. From the beginning to the end, Helian Vivian just looked at this scene indifferently with a cold look in her eyes. Lord Liao was in the middle, trying to stop her. His official robe was in a mess, even his hat was tilted to one side. He wanted to help Madame Liao up, but was pushed to the side by Madame Liao. Then, he took a heavy step back. Then, he felt a black shadow coming from behind him. The pressure was so strong that he didn't need to turn around to know who was behind him. Liao Wuliang, you've done well. It was just a few words, and there was a smile between the lips. But the evil murderous aura that surged out from the man's eyes made him kneel on the ground in fear. Bang, bang, bang. He kowtowed. Your Highness, please spare me. This official didn't do it on purpose. This official didn't know that it would be the princess. As he said, he pointed at Helian Jiao, it's all her fault. She seduced this official. This official was just blinded by lust. Before Liao Wuliang could finish the word blinded, Helian Jiao tore at him. You disgusting old man, how dare you say that I seduced you? It was you who kept using your eyes to look at me. If it wasn't to get rid of others, do you think I would be nice to you? Helian Jiao had already started to shoot her mouth off to the point that even she herself didn't know what she was saying anymore. The current her didn't have the appearance of the capital's most talented girl from before. That exquisite face already lost its makeup, and her hair was disheveled like a living lunatic. Bailey Jiaoju's tall and slender figure stood there, the cloak on his body fluttering in the wind. His posture was calm and elegant, his eyes slowly swept over the man and woman who were about to twist into a ball. His voice was cold as he issued an order. "Take all of them away and kill them. Kill. Kill." After hearing these 2 words, not only Helian Jiao and Liao Wuliang stopped, but even Madame Liao stopped crying. She wiped the tears from the corner of her eyes and crawled toward Beligaju. "Your Highness, although my husband is also at fault, he didn't know that it was the princess. If he knew, he definitely wouldn't dare to do this. The one who really wants to hurt the princess is that little bitch. My husband was just framed by her." "You mean to say that a beauty who is not the princess can be framed at will?" Beligaju glanced at the corner of his clothes that was touched by Madame Liao. His long eyebrows frowned, and the temperature in his eyes became a few degrees colder. "Take them away and kill them." Madame Liao was stunned and fell to the ground. She watched Liao Wuliang and that little bitch Helian Jiao being dragged away together. She was completely dumbfounded. Helian Jiao tossed her limbs and shouted at the top of her voice, "I want to see my mother, I want to see my grandfather. Your Highness, you can't kill me like this. You will regret it. Don't forget, I am the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. If I die, the War Dragon Empire will be destroyed. Do you want to be the heir of a destroyed empire?" Probably because Helian Jiao's voice was too loud, the shadow guards subconsciously stopped their actions and looked at His Highness. Beligaju slowly brushed his outer clothes, his tone was neither fast nor slow. He slightly raised his eyes, as if he was born with indifference. It was an indifference that looked down on all living beings. With a cold voice, it only said 1 word, "Kill." Everyone also felt that Helian Jiao should be killed. Such a woman is the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. That's not enough to make them feel ashamed. Madame Liao didn't want her husband to die. Seeing that Beligaju's side didn't work, she crawled to Helian Vivian's side. "Princess, you are a reasonable person, my husband just couldn't control himself." Chapter 429. Madame Liao. Helian Wei's voice slowly interrupted her. "Liao Wuliang is an official of the imperial court, but he used the power in his hands to persecute the harem girls on behalf of others. Just based on this point alone, his head should be chopped off. This is not something that can be controlled." Helian Vivian paused and said clearly, "Back then, when my mother's husband was snatched away by your good friend Su Yang Mo, what did you say? You didn't care if my mother was seriously injured, went to the general's residence, pointed at my mother, and asked my mother to give up her position to your good friend. Madame Liao, after so many years, you lived a carefree life, but when my mother was mentioned, you scolded her as a jealous woman. How you and Su Yang Mo framed my mother, the heavens are watching and people are living. It was not that he did not want to take revenge, but that the time had not yet come. Now, your retribution is here, so take it well. Otherwise, how can you be worthy of the gift I gave you?" Madame Liao's expression became worse as she listened, as if she was angry and embarrassed. Her chest churned, and blood overflowed from the corner of her mouth. Only now did she understand that the reason why Helian Wei did this was merely for revenge. She wanted to deal with them the same way they treated her mother. Retribution. All of this was really retribution. Madame Liao fell heavily to the ground, and no longer said anything. As if she had lost her mind, she stared blankly at a point in the distance, crying and laughing at the same time. Eunuch Sun directly asked someone to send her back to the Liao residence, so that His Highness and the princess would not see her. After such a scene, everyone was shocked. Not only because of Helian Vivian's appearance and talent. Also, the thing that they believed in back then was actually false. Master Helian, who was regarded as a jealous woman, was the most miserable one. The true love that they pitted turned out to be a pair of scum and a bitch. And Madame Liao, in their hearts, Madame Liao had always been the image of fighting for justice for others. Unexpectedly, she was not fighting for justice, but because her own people were in the wrong, she wanted to slander others first. At that moment, some people were silent. Especially when they saw the girl standing on the stage, facing the wind. They felt guilty from the bottom of their hearts. There were also some people who did not care about this at all, such as Unveils. She was very smart. She knew that in this situation, it was useless for her to say anything. She might even get herself into trouble. Therefore, she lowered her eyes at the right time, minimizing her presence as much as possible. Her hands clenched tighter and tighter. Everything had been planned out well. Unveils did not expect that the Hellion Jiawa would be taken away because of this. Now, Hellion Vivian had won. She didn't even have the chance to be a concubine anymore. I declare. The winner this time is the third princess consort, Hellion Vivian. Eunuch's son shouted excitedly. In other words, His Highness didn't need to have a secondary consort. In the end, it was still the princess consort who was more powerful. Eunuch's son thought happily, only to find that as soon as his voice fell, an unknown uproar came from the crowd. What is that? It looks like roses. So many roses. 10 cars. Wait. It doesn't look like just roses. And weapons. Just when the crowd was still confused, Hellion Vivian leaped. Her palms moved slightly, and all the wind obeyed her command. A breeze blew, and rose petals flew into the sky along with her robe. When the petals rose, her left hand was in the pocket of her robe lazily, and her right hand was holding a big bouquet of roses. Her long chestnut hair was evenly spread over her beautiful face, and her small earlobes were adorned with shiny silver studs. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and looked at her. There was a slight curve at the corner of his mouth, with a seductive look of confusion. Hellion Vivian looked at him and smiled faintly. Then, she knelt on the ground handsomely. All the petals moved with her movements, like a shower of flowers, flying and dazzling. At that moment, Beligaju seemed to hear the beating of his blood. What is she doing? Everyone was stunned by the scene in front of them. As long as they stretched out their hands, they would be able to touch the beautiful rose petals. The fragrance of the flowers was everywhere, and it felt like they were in a dream. Most importantly, why did the princess consort hold a big bouquet of roses and kneel in front of the third prince? Eunuch's son didn't understand, so he gave a look to the little seventh prince, hoping that his little master would tell him something. But, from the beginning, the seventh prince only had eyes for food. Now he was like a little tiger waiting for an opportunity, looking at the petals that were close to him. Which one would he grab to eat? In the whole world, perhaps only young Master Hay knew what Hellion Vivian was thinking. It was just to chase after his wife. You didn't hear wrongly, it was to chase after his wife. Cough. Hellion Vivian first cleared her throat, then laughed. Her midnight eyes had an indescribable affection. I have something to give you. If you accept it, you will be mine in the future. No matter if you are poor or rich, no matter if you live or die, you can only belong to me. How about it? Beligaju looked at her. His originally cold eyes gradually became as clear as spring water, as pure and innocent as an angel. He didn't say yes or no. At this time, Hazy couldn't hold back anymore. When he heard Hellion Vivian finally ask, he hurriedly shouted, "Accept her, accept her." He didn't know if it was because he shouted this sentence. Even more blessings rang out from all directions. Beligaju's lips curled up, and his eyes had a meaningful black-bellied look. All right, I will let you monopolize me. Tonight, I will let you monopolize me. I knew that the proposal was definitely a killer move to chase after his wife. Hellion Vivian smiled as she took out a small black suede box from her pocket and opened it, revealing 2 thin white gold rings. The rings weren't inlaid with any jewels. There was only a twisted wave in the middle, one to the left and one to the right. When the 2 overlapped, it just happened to be a small white gold heart. She was just about to put it on Beligaju when he picked her up. Her long black hair fell vertically along with the cloak, sweeping across the cold stairs and expensive carpet. In an instant, discussions and exclamations sounded like a tide, covering all the prosperity in this world, because they simply couldn't believe what they saw. That godlike existence of a man. Their most noble and indifferent royal family actually took the initiative to carry a woman. Hellion Vivian naturally felt these burning gazes. She helplessly buried her head in the man's fragrant chest. Chapter 430. Beligaju hugged the person leaning against the bookshelf. As proud as he was, He would never tell the person in his arms that he was the one who couldn't let go. It was like a person who had been crawling in the dark for a long time suddenly coming into contact with the first ray of sunlight. It would be scorching and dazzling. Instinctively, he wanted to hold on tight and never let go. The fierce collision brought out a sweet numbness that made Hellion Vivian tighten her grip on the stack of books. The rice paper fell all over the floor. She could hear the noise behind her, but she couldn't care less. Ultimate happiness was more important than anything else. Understanding each other made them closer. They even fell in love with the feeling of being so close to each other. The servants outside were also smart. They pretended not to hear anything even if they heard anything. There were also ministers who came to look for them. After all, such a big thing happened outside and the Hellion Jiawa was beheaded just like that. Whether it was the general's residence or Prime Minister Su's side, it would not be peaceful. However, those who dared to say anything to Beligaju were Hellion Jiawa, after all, had committed the crime of deliberately killing the princess. Apart from the elders of the 4 influential families, no matter how much trouble the rest of them made, they would not be able to stir up any big waves. Su Yangmo was about to cry her eyes out. She couldn't even enter the palace. It had only been 2 months, but the Su family had unknowingly fallen to such a state. Madame Su slowly realized that the power that once belonged to her was disappearing bit by bit. She originally thought that she didn't have to care about Hellion Vivian at all. Even if she had martial qi, even if she had become the 3rd princess consort. However, she was just a little orphan. How could she fight against monstrous power? She didn't expect that she would be so steady. First, she cut off her source of income in Jiangnan. Then, she used the weapon manufacturing incident to give her father a huge setback. Since that day, the 3 words Prime Minister Su would cause a burst of laughter in the imperial court. Now, that little bastard actually, how dare he kill her most precious daughter? Su Yangmo's eyes reddened. Everything happened too quickly. They didn't have time to think of a solution or use their connections. What could be more cruel than a white-haired person sending off a black-haired person before her own death? It was all because of that little bastard. If it wasn't for her, how could the mother and daughter have fallen to such a state? One died in the Yellow Springs, while the other lost his reputation. She must make that little bastard pay the price. Didn't she want to come back? She just wouldn't let her have her way. Suan, go and make the arrangements. Use all the connections you have with my father. I want to know the current general of the hidden army. No matter how much money you have to spend, find him for me. Yes. Also, go to the elders of the various clans and ask them if there should be an explanation for the death of the Phoenix girl. Yes. After you're done with this, go to the stewards of the Hellion family and make sure that they stand on Master's side during the clan meeting. I want to see with my own eyes that little bastard get chased out of this house like a stray dog. Yes, madam. After Suan left, Su Yangmo's entire face was twisted with hatred. Now, she didn't want anything else but to let Hellion Vivian have a taste of what it means to lose. It was night and the fog was thick. In the bustling long alley, the people were gradually disappearing, leaving only a tall and straight shadow. That person was wearing a white robe and behind him was a little person carrying a gourd. Master. The little person couldn't help but raise his head to look at his expression. He then reached out and touched his finger. It was so cold. The little person couldn't help but worry. Master, let's go back. His master had been standing here for a whole day. If he continued to stand there, his body wouldn't be able to take it. The man coughed softly. His ink-like eyes looked like they could overflow with water, gentle and clean. Did you see that just now? Cough, she was proposing to him. Master. The little person hurriedly said, Master, you said before that she hasn't fully awakened yet. Wait until the day she really wakes up, she'll recognize you. The man laughed softly and reached out to support his forehead. A storm swept in from behind him. The dark clouds were mixed with too much resentment. Go. Think of a way to wake her up. Yes, master. Scarlet eyes filled every corner of the street. That kind of evil and gloomy foreordained that there would be no peace in the future. Hellion Wei Wei woke up from a nightmare. She absent-mindedly looked at the person lying beside her. That handsome face, under the thin light of dawn, seemed to have become somewhat unreal. Hellion Vivian looked at him for a while, then raised her finger and poked. Beligajew's long eyebrows furrowed. Just as he was about to tell those who disturbed his peace to scram, just like before. As soon as he opened his eyes, he saw Hellion Vivian in his arms. A man who had just woken up was the sexiest and deadliest. Hellion Vivian didn't fully understand this saying before. Now that she saw His Highness, she realized that there was actually a man in this world who made her want to pounce on him the moment she saw him. What do you want to eat later? Beligajew moved her finger over and kissed it. Hellion Vivian began to think about this question seriously. In the end, she gave Beligajew a difficult question. I want to eat tiramisu. What's that? Beligajew raised his eyebrows. He had never heard of it before. Hellion Vivian licked her thin lips and explained, it's a kind of cake. When it enters the mouth, it's soft, sweet, and a little bitter. I want to eat it. Soft, sweet, and a little astringent. Bailey Jiaoju looked at her. Suddenly, he leaned over and kissed her lips. This? Hellion Vivian smiled and kissed him back. No, but I don't think you can buy it here. Let's eat apricot cake. It's the same. Okay. Beligajew agreed, but he didn't think so in his heart. Hellion Vivian's words let him know what the place she used to live was like. There was a snack called tiramisu, but there was no such thing here. Beligajew's eyes darkened, and he tightened his grip on her. Hellion Vivian took a bite of the apricot cake and looked at him with puffed cheeks. What's wrong? Nothing. Beligajew knew that she was starving, and the two of them didn't leave the bed. The snack box was at hand, and there were many snacks in it. He wiped the crumbs from the corner of her mouth. When she was eating, she didn't forget to feed him a bite and said, "This one is more delicious." Basically, he ate whatever she gave him. When Eunuch Sun saw this, he was amazed in his heart. His Highness didn't like to eat at the same table with others since he was young. When he grew up, which one of them didn't use the most luxurious things? Now, he was not picky about food, was easy to serve, and was cured of his misophobia. It should be celebrated by the whole country, but... Chapter 431. Eunuch Sun found that he was wrong. His Highness was only obsessed with the princess. When it came to them, it was the same. Get rid of them, don't get blood everywhere. Beligajew stood outside the palace and wiped his fingers with a white handkerchief. He looked at the people kneeling on the ground. In the future, don't let this Highness hear the words bring disaster to the country and its people. Yes, yes. The eunuchs in charge were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. When they looked at the face of the royal prince, they saw that his expression changed every minute. That faint smile, it was obvious that the princess had come. They knew the rules and immediately retreated. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Was she that ugly? When they saw her, it was like they had seen a ghost. She had clearly recovered her appearance. What's the matter with these eunuchs? Hellion Vivian asked a certain Highness who was standing on the side. Beligajew pulled her over and said in a calm voice, "They're probably in a hurry to go back and eat." Hellion Wei. Please, this lie of yours is too obvious, okay? Bailey Jiaoju smiled and kissed Hellion Wei's forehead as she squinted her eyes. He laughed softly and said, "I'll carry you inside. I'm sure you'll like the lunch I made today." Hellion Vivian was a person who knew how to enjoy life. She was a bit tired after staying up so late yesterday. Plus, there was nothing to do in the palace. When she read novels, it always mentioned that there were all kinds of chaos in the palace, all kinds of battles, all kinds of fights, and all kinds of disturbances. She wanted to show off her domineering aura at the right time and move a certain someone. Unexpectedly, the palace was as peaceful as the villa she used to live in. She basically didn't have to do anything every day. She only needed to enjoy life. Every day, she would play with her martial arts and pistols, tease Eunuch Sun, and watch Xiaoqi do a hip dance. There was no better life than this. Of course, there were always those who didn't know better. Hellion Vivian looked at the paper in her hand and her thin lips curled up. Since these two want to get close to the hidden army so badly, let's give them some benefits. Yes. The man in black lowered his eyes. Hellion Vivian waved her hand and dismissed him. When she looked up again, Belagaju had just finished washing his hands. His Highness had to wash his hands countless times a day. Thanks to his habit, she was free to do something else. Otherwise, apart from eating, he would only be sleeping. She couldn't help but suspect that His Highness was raising her like this. Was he planning to slaughter her like a little pig and stew her into soup one day? Belagaju heard her thoughts and smiled evilly. You're like this. Even if you're cooked and eaten, it's not as tasty as it is now. Don't let your imagination run wild. Eat more. Why did she feel like she was being attacked again? Hellion Vivian didn't feel uncomfortable being held in Belagaju's arms. Anyway, she was used to it. These 2 days, he carried her here and there. His posture was so handsome that she was happy and relaxed. When it came to things like being fed, Belagaju treated her like he was raising a daughter. She couldn't eat this, eat less that, eat more fruits, and so on. Often, Hellion Vivian would feel sleepy as she ate. She yawned and said, I'm not full yet. Belagaju hugged Hellion Vivian and closed his eyes. His voice was clear and noble. If you want to sleep, I'll ask them to make red bean pies for you later. Hellion Vivian nodded and closed her eyes. Pies are good. I love them. Yes, I love them too. Little 7th Prince stood beside the bed and nodded his head heavily. Belagaju got up and put his outer robe on Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping soundly. He looked at little 7th Prince condescendingly. What's the matter? Third brother, I also want to eat red bean pies. Little 7th Prince vigorously fought for his own benefits. Belagaju slowly buttoned his shirt. His voice was unhurried. If you don't say what's the matter, you won't have a share of the pies. Little black that I picked up some time ago is gone. The little black that little 7th Prince mentioned was the very mighty and domineering magical beast that could flatten the entire White Academy with a stomp of its feet. Belagaju picked him up and put him on the wooden chair. It's injured. Of course it will go back. I haven't fed it dragon meat yet. Little 7th Prince expressed that he was very unwilling to accept this outcome. I still want to ride it and go to the deep sea to hunt dragons. Belagaju glanced at him. You want to grow out those 2 teeth of yours before you think about hunting dragons. Little 7th Prince was recently growing out his teeth. When he smiled, one could see the missing part. That scene was very comical. All the servants found it funny when they saw it. But no one dared to mention it. Really, no one dared to mention it. They were afraid that this little tiger would directly bite them if it was unhappy. Don't look at how 7th Prince was soft and cute in front of Master and Princess Consort. But, usually, he was just a little poker face. He was even harder to deal with than Master. Of course, in fact, if he really made 7th Prince unhappy, he could completely use delicious food to deal with him. But to say the matter of his missing teeth so straightforwardly like now, they didn't know if 7th Prince could bear it. Eunuch's son looked at his little master with pity in his eyes. He really couldn't bear it and came up to coax him. 7th Prince, why don't you go with this servant to the imperial kitchen to see if the fish you caught this morning is ready? Haven't you always wanted to eat fish? Little 7th Prince looked up at the sky sadly. After thinking carefully, he said expressionlessly, all right, that's the only way. He couldn't beat third brother. Then let's go, 7th Prince. Eunuch's son stretched out a hand. Little 7th Prince also stretched out his hand and held his hand. Then, with a domineering and serious face, he said, Eunuch's son, tell me, if I don't have this tooth, will it affect my handsomeness? Will it? Eunuch's son lowered his eyes and looked at the little incisors that were leaking air when he spoke. He desperately held back his laughter and coughed twice before saying, it won't affect. You have good taste. Little 7th Prince heard the answer he wanted to hear and returned to his usual noble poker face. Wherever he went, no one dared to provoke him. On the other hand, Hellion Vivian was a little restless. The scene in the dream was getting clearer and clearer. She felt more and more resentment. That person really wanted to come back. But, it didn't seem that she would give up her body when she came back. If it was in the past, Hellion Wei would definitely return this body to him. But now, she had her own reasons for not wanting to leave. She didn't know if she would meet such a person again. He looked cold and heartless, but doted on her to the bone. Chapter 432. Pitter-patter. Raindrops fell on the wide leaves. Eunuchs and palace maids were walking back and forth in the imperial garden. There was only a remote area that was specially blocked by a few shadow guards. In the quiet pavilion, the retired emperor stood with his hands behind his back. He glanced at his favorite grandson and said, "Arju, tell me the truth. That girl, Wei Wei, has her body been taken over?" After the death of the Hellion Jiawa, the people of the four great families completely lost their composure. They insisted that the new princess was possessed and used all means to confuse the world. Even the royal family killed the Phoenix girl for her. They would face the fate of being destroyed in the future. Now that things had escalated to this point, he had to ask. Now that the Dragon War Empire was still in his hands, he was the one who coordinated all the forces involved. He could do anything according to Arju, he could do whatever he wanted. But, if it was a possessed person, the retired emperor lowered his eyes. He really didn't know what he would do. "She's not." Belegaju's tone was indifferent, his expression didn't change, "She's just a little smarter than before." Such a small thing actually became a topic of gossip. The retired emperor smiled, "That girl is not just a little smarter. If she's really the one who possessed the body, her main target should be the royal family, not the remnants of the Su family." Belegaju shook the teacup in his hand. The silver ring on his ring finger made his hands look even more noble. "If she didn't marry me, no one would say that about her." When the retired emperor heard this, he couldn't bear it and sighed, "You're the prince of the Dragon War Empire. So many eyes are watching you. It's normal for someone to take advantage of the slightest mistake and make an issue of it." Speaking of this, the retired emperor paused and said, "If Wei Wei is really possessed, what are you going to do?" "What else can I do? Of course, I can't let her go easily." When Belegaju said this, he held the teacup and took a sip of the water inside. His eyes were so deep that no one could see any thoughts. The person waiting at the side heard this and frowned. The retired emperor patted him on the shoulder. "A little girl, if she is a little too powerful, it will make people suspicious, especially when she has such a stepmother. Don't worry, grandfather will suppress this matter, but at the same time, you should be careful." Millimeter. Bailey Jiaoju's voice was faint as he replied. After that, the two of them talked about something else. "Third brother said that?" The fifth prince, who was only a few years younger than Belegaju, laughed coldly. "He is indeed a heartless person. Thanks to Hellion Vivian and Belegaju, he had been having a hard time recently. His mother was banished to the cold palace and was never allowed to leave. Her uncle was also killed for plotting a rebellion. Now, the entire Murong mansion was filled with white slips of paper. He, the fifth prince, was truly a good-for-nothing. Think of his glorious days in the past, and look at him now." The fifth prince clenched his fists and looked at the woman behind him. "Miss Yoon, please give me an idea." A woman dressed in shadow slowly walked out, but her face was covered by gauze. Her voice was soft as she lowered her eyes and asked the eunuch, "Did the third prince say that we can't let him off lightly?" "Yes, His Highness also said that the imperial palace will definitely not tolerate a person who is possessed." The servant lowered his head even more. "It sounds like he doesn't take the princess consort seriously." The fifth prince was not satisfied. "If that's the case, how am I going to deal with him?" "Calm down, Your Highness." Yoon Biluo laughed softly. "The royal family doesn't take Hellion Vivian seriously, haha. I wonder how Hellion Vivian will feel when she hears this." The fifth prince was suddenly enlightened. "You're thinking of... Ha ha ha, great. What a brilliant plan. Eunuch Lee, write down the conversation you overheard and send it to my heartless and lazy third sister-in-law. Let's see how they'll fight against each other." "Yes." Eunuch Lee bowed and left. Before he left, he glanced at Yoon Biluo again. Logically speaking, Yoon Biluo was called back by the Empress to help them drive a wedge between the retired emperor and the royal family. Now that the Empress had lost her power, Yoon Biluo did not kick her when she was down. Instead, she helped the little master to deal with that person. However, he still felt that he could not figure it out. What could he do even if he could not figure it out? He had to take a gamble before the retired emperor sent the little master to the frontier. Only then would he have a chance to survive. Dusk. Belagaju, who was dressed in white and black, was sitting in the south study room, reading the memorials in his hands. The ancient scrolls in his hands always gave off a different vibe. No one would believe that those hands could be so ruthless when it came to killing. Your Highness. An official who was kneeling in the south study room did not dare to stand up after such a long time. The brush in Belagaju's hand paused. When he saw the silver ring on his ring finger, his eyes softened a little. You may leave. Don't do this again. Leave. The official could not believe what he heard. He swallowed hard. Happiness came too suddenly. He was not ready yet. What should he do? Belagaju thought for a while and said, forget it. You don't have to leave. The official was speechless. No. I beg of you, Your Highness. I'd better leave. Although happiness came too suddenly, it was better than no happiness at all. I heard that you have many concubines, Belagaju continued in a flat tone. The official straightened his neck and shouted, that's just a rumor. Belagaju put down the brush in his hand and raised his long and narrow phoenix eyes. The official immediately became honest. He put his fingers together and said, in fact, it's not too many. Just a dozen. It's over. His Highness would not directly confiscate his house because of this matter, right? If His Highness insisted on doing so, he would die in front of him. How do you usually coax them? What? The official felt that there was something wrong with his ears. Trembling, he raised his head in shock. After confirming that it was his master who was asking, he tentatively replied, How do I coax them? What can make those women happy? Belagaju's voice was very light. His long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. The official was stunned. His Highness was seriously asking him now. Your Highness, you don't have to do anything. Just stand there and show your face. They will faint. He had never been so honest before. Belagaju rubbed the side of his face with his fingers and smiled evilly. She really likes this face of mine. The most handsome man in the world, who doesn't like him? The official looked at his master and then looked at his fat body. He suddenly felt sad. He always felt that the heavens were unfair. Besides the face. Chapter 433. Apart from the face. Money. The official had never seen his master so easy to talk to, so he was instantly excited. Your Highness, think about it. This humble subject looks like this, so why are there still people throwing themselves at me one after another? Belagaju faintly glanced at him. Isn't it because those people are blind? Official, he was wrong. Even if His Highness was abnormal, his poisonous tongue was still there. Because of this humble servant's identity. When the official said this, he was a little shy. I am in charge of the national treasury, so I will always have some money on hand. Belagaju's voice was low as he hummed. After the official said this, he was a little regretful. He thought to himself, oh my God, how did I tell him all my secrets? Is this His Highness' new way of interrogating people? The official glanced at Belagaju with uncertainty. How could Belagaju not see through his thoughts? He slowly turned the ring on his ring finger and smiled coldly. Today, I don't intend to kill anyone. However, if you continue to be so hesitant, maybe I will change my mind. Your Highness, don't be angry. This humble servant will continue. The official wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and said, when it comes to money, you have to know how to spend it. If you give them money directly, they may not like it much. You have to give them a part and use a part. For example, this humble official would always bring this humble official's new wife to Drunken Village at night and book a private room. She would order whatever she wanted to eat. Then, we would take a stroll around Buyun Manor and buy whatever new silk, satin, or headwear she fancies. In short, I'm buying it for her. Belagaju's slender fingers tapped on the ancient book, and his whole body was noble. That's it? That's basically it. In any case, he felt that money was omnipotent when used well. Belagaju closed the ancient book and raised his eyebrows. It's simpler than I thought. What is simple? The official was confused. He listened for a long time, but he didn't know what the master wanted to do. Could it be? Suddenly, the official seemed to have thought of something. His eyes swept over his master's fair and slender hands, and he immediately understood. His Highness was most likely asking for the Princess Consort. His guess was right. Beligaju was indeed doing this to make Hellion Vivian happy. After not going to White Academy for so many days, she must have been bored by herself. He had never forgotten how much she didn't like to be tied down and free. In order to dispel her thoughts of leaving the palace, the problem had to be solved from the root. Hellion Vivian had no idea what was going on. When she saw him walk in, she stretched lazily as usual. Then, she stuffed the snacks she had chosen into his mouth. Hugging the snack box, she smiled. A new discovery. How is it? Yes, it does. It smells like mint. Beligaju reached out and pulled her over. He held her in his arms and sat on the chaise lounge naturally. We'll go out for dinner. You go and change your clothes. Hellion Wei smiled. Okay. Men's clothing, or women's clothing? Men's clothing. Since that day, he didn't want her to appear on the street. She was too good at attracting bees and butterflies. Hellion Wei responded with a yes. After a while, she walked out in a white dress. Her face was beautiful, and because she was wearing men's clothing, the mole under the corner of her eye always gave people a kind of charm that they wanted to look at again and again. Beligaju looked at her for a long time. His long eyebrows wrinkled, and then he waved his sleeve. She didn't know what it was, but it was on her face. It's okay now. It's okay. Hellion Vivian looked at the face in the bronze mirror that couldn't be any darker. She couldn't help but wonder where His Highness's aesthetic standards were. Before she could ask, Beligaju had already bent his head and kissed her hard. It was a little overbearing, but also a little gentle. A kiss was like a storm, as if it couldn't blow her into the boundless sea. She could only hold on to him tightly, holding him, and constantly gasping for breath. I really don't want you to go out. The man's voice was low and hoarse, sexy and gentle. It was so pleasant to hear that it made people's hearts tremble. They couldn't help but want to agree to all of his requests. Hellion Vivian's face was crimson red. Her red lips were moist, and her eyes were full of moisture. It was even more seductive. Then I won't go out. Forget it, it's all arranged. Beligaju held her waist and couldn't help but bite her ear. Let's go. Hellion Vivian was very suspicious. If it wasn't arranged, how would His Highness torment her? Just thinking about it made Hellion Vivian feel like she had touched a taboo box. She directly buried her face in his arms. Smelling the man's pleasant scent, she comfortably closed her eyes. Beligaju carried her into the carriage like this. The two of them sat together. Their fingers were interlocked, and the light emitted by the rings gave people an indescribable feeling of intimacy. The two of them used aliases. They just came out to play for a day. He waved his sleeves and ordered all the eunuchs and guards in the palace to leave, leaving only the shadow guards who came and went without a trace. Just like that, they casually walked on the street. Both of their figures were very good-looking. Even if their appearances were disguised, their innate temperament still made many people subconsciously look back a few times. Hellion Vivian bought a roasted sweet potato. After opening it, she divided it into half for Beligaju. It was very sweet and hot in her mouth. Don't get it everywhere. The royal family was always responsible for wiping hands. Hellion Vivian wanted to tell him that eating roasted sweet potatoes had to be fast and accurate. But when she looked back at His Highness's table manners, she was conquered in a minute. After all, it was rare to see people who ate roasted sweet potatoes and made it into a beautiful movie promotional video. Her hands were dirty from eating, but only his fingertips were a little dirty. His table manners were very good. After Beligaju finished his roasted sweet potato, he wiped his hands with a handkerchief. It's getting late. Let's go to Zuexiang restaurant. There's something you like to eat there. Ian, after eating, we'll pack a portion of spiced beef for Xiaoqi. Hellion Vivian grabbed his hand and went upstairs. It was a top-notch private room, and every part of it was luxurious. Even if it was a private visit, The royal family couldn't change their preference for peace and quiet. Before the dishes were served, Zhuexiang restaurant would first serve some melon seeds and peanuts. Hellion Vivian held the box of melon seeds and ate them very obediently. Beligaju sat next to her. Like before, his arm was on the back of her chair. He said slowly, "I'll eat too." Hellion Vivian gave him a handful of melon seeds. Beligaju didn't take it. His body was still leaning back. His fingers stroked her long hair unhurriedly. "I thought this kind of thing should be served by Madam." Chapter 434. Hellion Vivian looked at Beligaju's smiling almond-shaped eyes and raised an eyebrow. Then, she popped a melon seed and sent it to Beligaju's mouth. His thin lips slightly opened, and she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but the tip of his tongue swept across her fingertips. He chuckled and said, "The taste is not bad." Hellion Vivian wanted to avoid it, but he held her waist and said, "Eat a few more. The dishes haven't been served yet." Hellion Vivian had no choice but to continue popping melon seeds for His Highness. But the next one, before she could put down the shell, he kissed her directly, letting the melon seed between his lips flow between the two of them. He didn't pry open her lips like before. Instead, he gently nibbled on it and said in a low voice, "Just like this, so seductive." Hellion Vivian didn't need to look at herself to know what state she was in. But his fingers were still undoing her robes, and his hot breath hit her, burning her legs. "Didn't I tell you before that you look even more attractive in men's clothing? Don't do it here." Hellion Wei's eyes were watery from being rubbed by him, and her voice was a little shaky. "Sure." Beligaju picked her up and kissed her behind the ear, but he didn't really want to do anything here. The two of them were intimate for a while. Only then did he let her go and feed her some water. Hellion Vivian's fingers were weak because of that intimacy, and the corners of her eyes were still red as she leaned into his arms. The dishes were all ordered, and Shadow was in charge of delivering them. It wasn't much different from the palace. The main thing was that the two of them didn't like crowds, so they were more casual. They didn't need to let others see how loving they were, so everything was more relaxed. Like now, Hellion Vivian was leaning in Beligaju's arms, like a little hamster eating the food that His Highness gave her. The table was full of delicacies, and the small jar of pork ribs was still warm, not to mention the braised prawns. Every dish was very appetizing. In the past, Hellion Vivian found it troublesome to eat prawns. Now, watching a man peel prawns was like watching an aesthetic scene. Delicious. Beligaju looked at her slightly puffed cheeks and smiled. Hellion Vivian put a prawn in his mouth and chuckled, "It's delicious." The dinner lasted for almost 2 hours. In the end, Hellion Vivian felt a little sleepy and kept yawning. When she walked through the hall, she saw that some of the things that women couldn't eat were eaten by the men. Therefore, she tugged at His Highness's hand and showed it to him. She meant that he should learn from it in the future. Bailey Jiaoju gave her face and glanced at her. Then, he looked back at her and said in an indifferent tone, "I do want to eat your leftovers. The point is, Madam, when have you ever left anything behind?" Hellion Vivian. It seemed that, indeed, she had never left anything behind. Why did she feel that she was being mocked again? "I don't eat much either." Hellion Vivian felt that she had to clear her name. Beligaju nodded and hugged her. He was very insincere. "Compared to Little Seven, you really don't eat much." Hellion Vivian. Beligaju looked at the petrified Hellion Vivian and couldn't help but laugh. He kissed her forehead and said, "Go to the carriage and take a look. There's something for you." "For me." Hellion Vivian smiled and walked to the front of the carriage. When she lifted the curtain, she saw the gold, silver, and jewels spread out on the ground. That pair of ink-black eyes lit up in an instant, beckoning Bailey Jiaoju to lie on it, completely luxurious. The carriage didn't go directly into the palace. Instead, it went to a royal garden. There were torches lit outside and the interior of the carriage was illuminated by night pearls. The two of them hugged each other and lifted the curtain. They felt more comfortable than ever as they enjoyed the night breeze and the sound of insects. "What did you do to those 2 palace servants yesterday?" Hellion Vivian looked up and asked as she ate sunflower seeds. Hearing this, Bellegaju's face was full of hostility. He sneered, "Just a small matter. They didn't handle it properly and let you know?" Hellion Vivian paused and didn't say anything. Bellegaju looked at her expression and realized that he had lost his composure. He quickly calmed down and chuckled. "Don't listen to those people's nonsense. Those 2 palace servants were unclean and I sent them out of the palace last night. If you have time to think nonsense, why don't you think about how to repay me for today's arrangement?" As he spoke, he hugged her and kissed her neck. Hellion Vivian didn't really care about those things. However, she didn't know how long he would torment her in this kind of place. But although she said so, her body couldn't resist. Moreover, a new full moon was coming. Every touch was like an invisible hook to her. Bellegaju had already begun to undress her. Her entire body was numb and she couldn't break free. She could vaguely hear him say in her ear, "Say you want me to go in." Hellion Vivian's voice changed from being tortured by him. It was a bit hoarse, but she could only say a single word. Bellegaju couldn't help it. Looking at her long hair scattered on the expensive red fur in the carriage, everything seemed so tempting. He exerted strength in his palm and gently moved. Worried that someone would know what was going on in the carriage, Hellion Vivian bit her lips tightly. However, she was tormented by him again and again until she just wanted to scream out loud. Her slender fingers couldn't help but grab the fur under her body. She begged in a hoarse voice, "Slow down." But he smiled and lowered his head to kiss her ear. His breathing was very heavy. "Slow down. How can I let you give birth to a prince for me, His gentle words made Hellion Vivian's ears turn red. "When we were at the dinner table just now, I was thinking about having you like this." Bellegaju's voice fell. The moonlight shone in densely, but it couldn't hide the charm in the carriage. She didn't know how long had passed. The numbness still hadn't faded. Hellion Vivian was originally muddle-headed, but because of the invasion again and again, she was a little happy and absent-minded. It was different from usual, but the slow torment was intoxicating. Time after time, it directly hit the top of her heart, mixed with his heartbeat. At that time, Hellion Vivian only felt an indescribable happiness. He coaxed her to say a lot of things that she couldn't say normally. He even lowered his voice and guided her, "Say that you will never leave me. Say it." Hellion Vivian didn't know what he was saying. Bellegaju didn't give it to her. Hellion Vivian couldn't stand it. Her breath was unstable, and she said all the words. Then, she was extremely excited. After a night of entanglement, her body was as hot as fire. It wasn't until noon the next day that Hellion Vivian woke up in the bedroom. Just as she was washing up, she received an unknown letter. Chapter 435. The letter was seen by the eunuch who usually took care of the internal affairs. There were only 4 words written on the envelope. Hellion Vivian the eunuch didn't know what to do with this letter. Also, he wasn't literate, so he gave it to Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch's son was probably the only one in the palace who was literate. Originally, he wanted to directly give it to Bellegaju, but before he could move, Hellion Vivian took the letter from his hand. "Wang, Princess Consort." Eunuch's son stuttered, then indicated for the young eunuch to leave first. Hellion Wei's slender fingertips slid across the envelope as her lips curved into a smile. After that, she glanced at him and opened the letter in front of Eunuch Sunday. After that, she read the letter line by line. There wasn't much in the letter, it was just the contents of the conversation between the Emperor Emeritus and Bellegaju. From when the retired emperor asked Bailey Jiaoju what he would do if she was really the one who had taken over his body, to when Bailey Jiaoju said that if it was true, he would definitely not let her go easily and treat her lightly, and so on and so forth. Everything, big and small, was written down one by one. Hellion Wei's letter was opened in front of Eunuch's son, so he couldn't help but take a few glances at the letter. When he reached the end, he immediately became anxious and scolded, "Which son of a bitch couldn't bear to see others doing well and came to sow discord? Someone come, quickly burn this letter for me." Eunuch's son said this while looking at Hellion Vivian's expression. His heart was shocked again. He didn't know what the princess consort meant. That day when His Highness said this, he was also there. He only heard a few sentences and forgot what His Highness said that day. But who would have thought that someone would write down this kind of thing for the princess consort to see? It really was a vicious mind. He had watched the two of them get to where they were today. His Highness finally found someone he liked and pampered her everywhere. He really didn't dare to imagine. If His Highness lost the princess consort, would the entire imperial palace be buried with her? He and the Emperor Emeritus didn't want to see His Highness fall into the devil's path because of his cold nature. They were afraid that something would go wrong, so they quickly advised, "Princess Consort, you must not believe the nonsense of these people. The person who wrote this kind of letter clearly has other thoughts. Princess Consort should give this letter to this old servant. Such a dirty thing should not be seen by the princess consort." On His Highness' side, even if he said it, he definitely didn't mean it. His Highness is. I know. Helian Wei Wei laughed softly, as if she was very much looking at Eunuch Sun's anxious appearance. She teased him, "Eunuch Sun is truly more anxious than your own matters." Eunuch Sun was stunned and then let out a long sigh of relief. "Princess, you didn't say anything just now. You really scared this old servant to death. This old servant thought that you had a grudge against His Highness." "How could that be?" Helian Vivian carefully looked at the letter. She picked it up with her fingers and sniffed it. Her voice was cold. Using this kind of method to send this letter, they definitely don't have good intentions. If this kind of thing really happened, I will directly ask Beligaju. Also, Eunuch Sun said that possession is nonsense. Eunuch Sun didn't react for a moment. Did he say this? He probably said it, right? No matter what, as long as the princess consort didn't misunderstand His Highness, it was fine. But this letter can't be burned. Helian Vivian supported her chin with one hand and picked up the letter with the other. She lazily smiled. Eunuch Sun was stunned. Why? Could it be that the princess consort said it was fine, but she still cared? Carefully feel the thickness of this paper. Helian Vivian's voice was calm. It's very comfortable to touch. It's not rough at all. It also has a sandalwood fragrance. People can't afford to use this kind of paper. Also, in the imperial palace, other than the emperor and retired emperor, only the princes can use it. This paper must be kept. When His Highness returns, it will be given to His Highness. If it really is another prince, then we have to guard against it. After all, the conversation between retired emperor and His Highness is not easily known to others. It can be seen that this person has planted some people in the imperial palace. Eunuch Sun listened to Helian Vivian's analysis. He was so shocked he couldn't speak. When he first saw this letter, he was only concerned with being angry. How could he notice the quality of the paper? Now that he felt it, it was familiar. The imperial palace was very particular about the use of rice paper. The imperial household had records of what kind of paper each person used. The retired emperor, the emperor, and the princes all used the best paper. Princesses and concubines were second. He had been with His Highness for a long time. He more or less had the ability to distinguish. He knew that this kind of letter usually came with bad intentions. But he had never seen someone as calm and composed as the princess consort. Eunuch Sun restrained himself and asked, "Princess consort, after reading these words, won't your imagination run wild? If I can't see through these provocations, then I don't need to mingle." Helian Wei Wei hugged her own snack box, raised her head and laughed. Her hair was fluffy. "As for letting my imagination run wild, I really haven't. If someone else said that His Highness only treats me as prey and raises me, I would be more convinced. Moreover, at that time, His Highness had to give retired emperor such an answer. Otherwise, he wouldn't be protecting me, but harming me. In this case, the more Beligaju pretended not to care, the safer she would be. The safer she would be. He was protecting her, but she still doubted him. Whether it was good words or not, it was not to be heard with the ears, but to try to feel with the heart. Think of things simply and see the result. Then, you would know who was really good to you. He could be unscrupulous, but for her, he held back his anger. She didn't care about the process. She was the same as him. She couldn't say flowery words. Sometimes, she would even use unscrupulous thoughts that others would think. But, this was just the way they loved each other. No matter what the other party was thinking, as long as the final result was for the two of them to be together forever, it was good. Hellion Vivian even didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she saw the letter. Perhaps too many people couldn't distinguish right from wrong in the face of rumors and slanders. But these people, did they really think she was stupid? She could analyze, look at the result, and know what the trend of this matter was. Any blind emotion wouldn't last long. She had already brought up all the grudges she had with him in the beginning. Others wanted to use a few words to destroy her feelings for Beligaju. She didn't want to believe that he was good to her, but she wanted to believe a few words of falsehood. Why did she feel that her intelligence was being challenged like never before? She really wanted to directly give the other party a ha-ha. They didn't even understand her nature, but they actually sent this kind of letter. As a domineering president. Chapter 436. Of course, one had to love and dote on their other half rationally. This was the common sense in arms tycoon. Don't you even know common sense? People who don't read novels are scary, they are uncultured. At the same time, the fifth prince and Yoon Biluo, who were in another part of the palace, were eager to see the infighting between Hellion Wei Wei and Bailey Jiaoju. They would never understand where their plan went wrong. If Hellion Vivian told them that it was because they had never read novels. The result would be cough, cough, cough. The letter did not stay in Hellion Vivian's hands for long. In less than a quarter of an hour, it was handed to Beligaju. Eunuch Sun could clearly feel the air around him turning cold. His master just smiled, his pure black eyes were cold. This letter is well written. The person who wrote it is interesting too, not missing a single word. It must have been hard on them. Eunuch Sun did not dare to speak, he swallowed his saliva hard. Beligaju picked up the teacup in his hand, his fingers paused. Crack. He threw it out. The water droplets splashed on the table, soaking the rice paper on it. Go and investigate. Beligaju narrowed his eyes, revealing an oppressive aura that made people hold their breaths. After you find out, bring them to Imperial Grandfather. They have worked so hard, I should treat them well. Eunuch Sun knew that the treatment his master was talking about would be worse than hell. However, he rarely saw His Highness so angry. Even if he killed someone, he would do it lightly and not stained with blood. After he was done, he would wash his hands and change his clothes, maintaining his usual immaculate appearance. It was rare to see him deal with someone directly like today. It seemed that those people had crossed His Highness's bottom line this time. After all, the Princess Consort should not have seen that letter. Thinking of this, Eunuch Sun hesitated and said, then the Princess Consort. Upon hearing this, Beligaju's fingers paused, his eyes darkened. Go and call Nangong Lai here. Young Master Lai. Eunuch Sun did not understand why he was calling him Young Master Lai at this time. Beligaju frowned and his tone was much lighter. He's better at dealing with this kind of thing. Eunuch Sun instantly understood. When it came to coaxing women, young Master Lai did have his own way of coaxing them. In less than half an incense's time, Nangong Lai, whose robe was slightly open, strolled over and directly sat on the chaise lounge. He stretched out his hand and loosened his collar. Ah Ju, fortunately you called me over. I don't know what's wrong with that group of old things recently. It's like they've gone crazy. They insist that Wei Wei is possessed and ask me to perform divination for them every day. By the way, why are you looking for me? Beligaju didn't say much and directly threw the letter to him. After Nangong Lai finished reading, he smiled evilly. Someone actually dared to eavesdrop on your conversation with the retired emperor. Are they tired of living? I just got this letter from Wei Wei. Beligaju's voice was indifferent. His fingers tapped on the wooden table as if he was thinking. Nangong Lai's expression was one of confusion. This kind of letter obviously can't be in her hands. It will definitely cause a misunderstanding and affect the relationship between you two. She didn't misunderstand. Beligaju suddenly seemed to have figured something out. The corner of his mouth curled up. That kind of smile made Nangong Lai a little dizzy. Then why are you telling me this? Nangong Lai didn't understand. Beligaju reached out and took his outer shirt. He slowly buttoned it up. Nothing. I just want to show off my relationship with her. Nangong Lai was speechless. Wait, Arju, come back and explain clearly. What's the point of torturing me like this? Bailey Jiaoju did not pay any attention to the voice behind him as he paced back to the palace. Hellion Vivian was talking to a mercenary in black. When she saw him coming, she said to the mercenary, "That's it. You go and do it." "Yes." The mercenary looked down and left. When he brushed past Beligaju, he couldn't help but feel a little nervous. He also understood that if it wasn't for this man's permission, he wouldn't even be able to enter. Although on the surface, the third prince restricted the young lord's freedom. In fact, no matter what the young lord did, this man didn't stop him. "I asked the imperial kitchen to make rose cake for you. Have you eaten it?" After the mercenary left, Beligaju directly reached out, picked her up and put her on his lap. His voice was low and pleasant. Hellion Vivian yawned and played with his hand. She compared their hands. "I ate a piece. It wasn't as good as the apricot cake. Little Seven liked it, so I gave it to him. He's losing his teeth now. How can he taste it?" Bailey Jiaoju chuckled and interlocked his fingers with hers. He slowed down and said, "Regarding today's letter, I did say some of the words on it, but not the rest. However, when I said these words, I didn't want people to keep an eye on you. Since ancient times, people's hearts are unpredictable in this palace. I'll get rid of the people from the 4 great families sooner or later. When the time is right, I'll make them all shut up. In this world, only the dead were the safest." Hellion Vivian saw the violence in his eyes. After thinking, she leaned over and kissed his eyelids. "I know, but there's one thing that makes me very angry." "What?" Beligaju's heart suddenly stopped. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and yawned lazily. "What do you think the person who sent this letter is thinking? Is he insulting my intelligence? I know how good you are to me. Even if you raise a dog, it can't bite its owner, let alone a person. Don't you see the collar on my neck? I'm the overbearing president of the loyal dog. A group of little brainless people." Beligaju touched her hair and put his thin lips behind her ear. His voice was low and tempting. "Say those 2 words again." Hellion Wei was puzzled and paused. "What 2 words? What can't I bite?" Bailey Jiaoju casually said as he reached his hand into her clothes. His handsome face was indifferent, as if he wasn't the one who was doing these things. It was probably because of his temperament that people felt the contrast was more exciting. Hellion Vivian was hot all over. She refused to say those 2 words again. But how could Bailey Jiaoju let her go? After a few rounds of caressing, he kissed her from the shoulder down inch by inch through her clothes. He held her waist from behind with one hand and undid those annoying buttons with the other hand. He mischievously bit her ear lightly. "Be good, tell me, what can't I bite?" Chapter 437. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but call out in a trembling voice, "Master." These 2 words seemed to have hit a switch, causing Beligaju's eyes to darken. He directly picked up Hellion Vivian and rubbed against her heavily, tormenting her. However, it felt like he was taking care of her. It felt like he was trying to please her. The pleasure he brought even made her toes feel a little numb. After that, the 2 of them lay on the small bed. He followed her hair and kissed the corner of her eyes, but his eyes were smiling. This little thing was smarter than other people. Especially those words just now. How could someone be so likable when they spoke? Loyal dog. Who would call themselves a dog? Idiot. As Beligaju thought about it, he pinched Hellion Vivian's paw. "Do you like cats or dogs?" Hellion Vivian smiled and opened her eyes lazily. "I like both, but I prefer large dogs." "Why?" Beligaju looked at her and then smiled elegantly. His charming thin lips opened slightly, and there was an indescribable charm. His voice was so low that it was pleasant to the ear. Woof. Hellion Vivian was really stunned. She stared blankly at the man in front of her. What did she just hear? Even though Hellion Wei's temperament was usually calm and rational, seeing this kind of scene, she also somewhat felt that she was dreaming. However, the corners of Beligaju's mouth curled up into a smile. Woof. Ah. How could this man be so cute? It was simply against the rules. That face was already seductive enough. He even barked at her. That was why a certain highness was a torturous little demon. No one was more torturous than him. Hellion Vivian directly hugged his waist and was very happy. Bark again and I'll eat ribs today. To be able to raise a royal as a pet, it was definitely awesome to take it out. This was the true portrayal of marrying a tall, rich, and handsome man and walking to the pinnacle of life. Compared to pork ribs, I prefer to eat. Beligaju lowered his eyes and leaned his thin lips against Hellion Vivian's earlobe. Hellion Vivian trembled. She almost suspected that he deliberately didn't say the word you so that she would think of Pian. However, the way His Highness lowered his voice and barked was too tempting. There was no way to refuse. As if he had seen through her thoughts, Bailey Jiaoju let out a deep woof in her ear again. His drawn-out tone had a magnetism that made people fall deeply into it. Eunuch Sun stood outside, not daring to look around. It was only because he had something to report that he hesitantly reported from behind the precious screen, "Your Highness, the letter has been handed over to the Imperial Clan Court according to Your Highness's wishes. The retired Emperor also knows about this matter." Hellion Vivian was about to get up when she heard them talking about business. "You sleep for a while. I'll deal with it." Beligaju took an outer robe and covered her properly. Then, he walked out with the robe half open. Eunuch Sun almost didn't dare to raise his head because he didn't have time to hide his seductive aura. As a servant, he couldn't say anything. In the past, he thought that His Highness wouldn't be very interested in that kind of thing. Who knew that after the Princess Consort entered the palace? His Highness was more and more like from now on, the Emperor won't attend morning court according to this progress, the Princess Consort would definitely be pregnant with the little master in no time. When Eunuch Sun thought of this, he felt happy. Recently, the retired Emperor often talked to him about this. In the future, what clothes to wear for the little master and what treasures to give him. He couldn't be like the little 7th prince, who wore tiger-headed and tiger-skinned clothes from a young age. They must raise the little master delicately. As soon as Bailey Jiaoju saw Eunuch Sun's motivational expression, he knew that this old man was thinking of something else. His voice faintly opened his mouth. After retired Emperor found out, what did he say? Eunuch Sun replied, he already sent people to investigate this matter. Beligaju slowly turned the ring on his ring finger and said in a cold voice, "Let the Emperor also understand." The elders of the 4 great families also told them not to mention the possession of the body. Put the focus on the matter of the 5th prince having other thoughts. When I kill someone, I have to let them watch me kill. Eunuch Sun, do you understand? Eunuch Sun was shocked by the cold tone of his voice. He knew that his master lowered his voice to talk about this matter because he didn't want the princess consort to know. He also understood what His Highness meant. Usually, this kind of thing would never involve the Emperor. After all, that person, to say something disrespectful, he was always playing with those elixirs of immortality. How would he have time to care about the matters of the imperial court? But it was this kind of emperor who was most afraid of the princes having thoughts about his throne. His Highness was the heir apparent appointed by the retired emperor. Because of this identity, the emperor was always on guard against His Highness when he was young. If it wasn't for His Highness's martial qi that was unparalleled in the world and could control the people of the 4 great families, how could he live peacefully until now? If the emperor knew about this matter, it wouldn't be so simple. It had to be said that His Highness's methods were always so ruthless. This kind of thing, don't let the princess consort know about it in the future. Beligaju said lightly. Eunuch Sun understood that today's letter shouldn't have been seen by the princess consort. His Highness sent him to the princess consort to avoid this kind of situation. Fortunately, the princess consort was open-minded. If it was another woman, there might be some misunderstanding. When Eunuch Sun thought about it now, he still felt a lingering fear. His forehead overflowed with sweat, and he replied in a low voice, "Yes, Your Highness, don't worry. This kind of thing will never happen again. It's not your fault. Those people are too considerate." Beligaju curved his thin lips, but there was no smile in his eyes. He just stood in the shadow of the wooden window with his robe open, giving people a feeling that he was encountering a demon and was full of hostility. He lowered his head and took a sip of the teacup in his hand, and said in a cold voice, "They're courting death." The imperial palace began to fall into an indescribable silence. It was because it was too quiet. It was inevitable that the fifth prince would have doubts. Even Unveils didn't understand. Could it be that the letter wasn't delivered? If Hellion Vivian didn't receive the letter herself, then all of this would be meaningless. "Miss Yun, what do you think we should do now?" After all, the fifth prince was still young and didn't understand the situation. Unveils was smart enough to ask him to bear with it, and said, "But we can ask around if Hellion Vivian received the letter." This was easy. The palace servants all had their own way of doing things. They didn't need to ask directly to get the clues they wanted. Soon, the eunuch who served the fifth prince all year round came back. He knelt on the ground and said, "Your Highness, I've found out that the letter was received by the third princess consort herself." The grudge in her heart should have been planted. Chapter 438. Good. The fifth prince could not help but exclaim. There was still a hint of immaturity on his handsome face. Unveils laughed as well and said softly, "There's no such thing as an impenetrable secret in this world. It's true that women are unpredictable. Your Highness, you don't have to get involved in this matter anymore. Just wait for Hellion Vivian to make a fuss." "You're right, Miss Yun." The fifth prince sneered, "If it weren't for her, my mother wouldn't have been banished to the cold palace. She's an orphan who lost the support of her family. How could she expect to ride roughshod over the palace after doing something bad? Ha, what a joke. No matter how much my royal grandfather dotes on her and Beligaju, my royal father is still on my side." That was what the fifth prince was grasping. The existence of Beligaju had always been a thorn in the emperor's heart. His son was more prestigious than the emperor. To be honest, if it were not for Beligaju's shrewdness and ruthlessness, perhaps the emperor would have dealt with him long ago. However, the four great families were in the way. The internal conflict within the imperial family had been put on hold. However, anyone with a discerning eye knew that the emperor favored the fifth prince more. Otherwise, the emperor did not really do anything to the fifth prince when such a big incident happened last time. It was obvious that if the fifth prince did not have that thought, even if Empress Murong had that thought, he would not have done anything to his beloved son. The fifth prince knew this very well, which was why he dared to put someone beside the retired emperor without any scruples. He thought that even if something were to happen in the future, he and his royal father were on the same side. His royal father would protect him. Little did he know that the emperor in the alchemy room already had the idea of disposing of him. The emperor slammed the letter in his hand on the wooden table. His eyes were filled with anger as he listened to the people below talking about how the fifth prince was doing now. He even knew the retired emperor's movements clearly, let alone the emperor's. It was obvious that he had thoughts that he should not have and reached out his hand that he should not have. When the emperor heard the last sentence, the teacup and snacks in his hand were crushed. Beligaju, who was sitting next to him, had a nonchalant expression on his face. He gently turned the teacup in his hand, as if he didn't care about this matter at all. The emperor knew that he should give an explanation to Beligaju. In the past, when he encountered this kind of thing, he would always put on an act, but in private, he would protect the fifth prince. Now, the emperor didn't want to give anyone an explanation, but he felt that he had raised an ingrate. Just like what the people below said, he dared to cut off the retired emperor's words without missing a word, let alone her. If this wasn't the same as prying into his throne, then what was it? Call the fifth prince over. As the emperor threw the teacup in his hand, all the palace servants shuddered. In his heart, he thought that this time, there would be a large-scale change in the imperial palace. Fortunately, they were in the right position. Indeed, accompanying the emperor was like accompanying a tiger. At the beginning of this year's spring, who would have thought that the doted Murong clan would collapse? Now, not only was the empress banished to the cold palace, this fifth prince would also be implicated. If the third prince wasn't involved, how could this situation happen? Therefore, those people who understood the situation, whether it was the eunuchs in the imperial palace or those ministers who didn't know which side to stand on, they all had an idea in their hearts. The third prince was the future master of the Dragon War Empire. Even if he didn't have the retired emperor's favor, he would still be. However, the fifth prince, who didn't understand all of this, was still in his own palace, planning how to meet Hellion Vivian by chance. Using this letter, he would make things difficult for both her and Beligaju. The fifth prince was just thinking about it and was planning to set out when he suddenly received the news that the emperor wanted to see him. In his heart, he didn't think much of it and even had some good intentions. He was very enthusiastic to the eunuch who came to deliver the news. "It's just a summon, I have to trouble Eunuch Li to personally make the trip. Men, reward him." This reward is not necessary. Eunuch Li struggled to maintain the smile on his face. Fifth prince should quickly pack up and follow this old servant to the emperor. The fifth prince, who was wholeheartedly thinking about his own good plans, didn't notice the expression on Eunuch Li's face today. He laughed heartily. "All right, then this highness will go with Eunuch Li first. This reward will be given later." His empress mother had taught him since he was young that he must spend a lot of money to support those who could be used. It was because he spent so much money that he could still do things in the retired emperor's place. This Eunuch Li also received a lot of benefits from him and more or less told him about the emperor's matters. The fifth prince felt that this time, the emperor summoned him, was just like before, to give him some instructions. However, when he really entered the palace of heavenly purity, he realized that something was wrong. As soon as he raised his head, he met Beligaju's eyes. They were so cold and indifferent, without a trace of warmth. It made the fifth prince feel a chill from the bottom of his heart. Before he could react to why the third brother he hated and feared the most was here, the third brother. The emperor had already waved his hand to dismiss Eunuch Li. The fifth prince knelt on the ground and paid his respects. He didn't hear the emperor ask him to get up. The entire palace fell into an uneasy silence. The emperor took a sip of tea, but there was an indescribable gloominess in his eyes. When he looked at the fifth prince, he smiled coldly. "Why do you keep looking back at Eunuch Li?" The fifth prince knew that this was not an easy question to answer. The people in power were always suspicious, especially his father, the emperor. This son just doesn't know what happened. "You don't know what happened?" The emperor sneered and threw the letter in his long sleeve at the fifth prince's face. "If you don't know what happened, then where did these things come from? This is the Xian paper specially used by you." When the fifth prince saw the letter, his face suddenly turned pale. He hurriedly explained to himself, "Imperial father, I do have this Xian paper, but other than me, the other princes also have it. Imperial father, you can make a decision for me. Stand up for you." The emperor sneered, "You still have the face to ask me to stand up for you. This letter was just sent to your third brother, and then your personal eunuch went around each courtyard. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think that I can't be sure that it's you if I don't ask around? Also, how dare you say the words other princes? Your fourth brother has gone beyond the Great Wall and hasn't returned yet. Other than you, there's only little Seven among the princes. Little Seven is only a little older, 4 years old. He's just a 4-year-old child. How do you expect him to intercept the conversation between the retired emperor and your third brother?" Chapter 439. When the fourth prince heard this, he was so flustered that he didn't know what to do. In the past, with his mother's help, he had always been able to handle things with ease. But today, he actually began to doubt himself. He had never thought that the emperor would actually find out that he had only written a letter in someone else's handwriting. The weirdest one was Hellion Vivian. Shouldn't a normal person hide this letter and try not to confront it face to face? She actually showed it to third brother. What kind of logic was this? Wasn't she afraid of what third brother said in the letter? How stupid was that Hellion Vivian? She actually wanted to hand over her past to someone else. The fifth prince tried his best to calm himself down. He was still kneeling on the ground and his voice was slightly trembling. "Imperial father, I didn't mean to criticize seventh brother. I just don't know what happened. I'm not the only one who has the paper used by this prince. Others also have it. Even the eunuchs and palace servants have picked up waste paper. This son is slow-witted and can't find any evidence to prove my innocence. All these years, I have been doted on by Imperial Father. This son isn't afraid of anything. I'm only afraid that Imperial Father will be disappointed in this son and hurt the relationship between Imperial Father and me. Imperial Father was wary of third brother. He clearly understood that saying these words could at least win him a chance to live. Sure enough, the Emperor's anger slightly subsided after hearing the fifth prince's words. Just like what Little Five said, it might be a misunderstanding. If someone jealous of him used this matter to drive a wedge between them, then wouldn't he have been fooled? The Emperor had just thought of this. Before he could open his mouth, he heard a noise coming from outside. When he raised his head again, he saw the dignified little Seven carrying a palace servant and throwing him to the ground. Tell Imperial Father everything you know. That palace servant was none other than the fifth prince's personal eunuch who served him all year round. He was beaten to a pulp. The heart-wrenching pain made his entire body curl up. However, this was not the reason why he was about to reveal everything about the fifth prince. Even now, he still couldn't forget that Hellion Vivian, who made everyone feel that she definitely couldn't do well in the palace. If it weren't for His Highness' protection, who knew how many times she would have appeared? She looked at him like a demon. Her voice was neither high nor low, but it was enough to make him freeze in place. She said, Eunuch Zhong's family definitely doesn't know what kind of person Eunuch Zhong is in the palace. If they knew, how sad would they be? This was a threat. Eunuch Zhong clenched his fists, but he couldn't stop the fear that welled up in his heart. At that time, his first reaction was that this was going to be bad. Not only him, but also the fifth prince had underestimated Hellion Vivian. She was not an ordinary girl at all, and she was definitely not someone who only knew how to eat and sleep. Her methods were better than the third prince's, but not inferior at all. Both husband and wife were extremely ruthless. They would not give anyone the slightest chance to breathe. At this point, he had no choice but to say everything. The Emperor's anger was about to subside, but after hearing Eunuch Zhong say that the Empress had already instructed the fifth prince to reward the people in the palace, which was why the retired Emperor had a connection. He wanted to use this opportunity to make the royal family and the third princess consort suspect, etc. The Emperor was completely enraged. He couldn't care less. He took the teacup in his hand and threw it at the fifth prince. Bastard. You still say that you don't know anything. You even said that someone is deliberately trying to sow discord between me and your father. You've already reached out where you shouldn't have. I'm not dead yet. You're so flamboyant. Good, very good. In the past, he always felt that his beloved son was still young and didn't understand these things, so he was especially close to him. He didn't expect that he actually had people in the palace. He was so young, but he was so ambitious. He even knew how to bribe the people in the palace. What was he trying to do? The thing that the Emperor couldn't tolerate the most was for the princes to wantonly seize power. This time, the fifth prince's action had completely violated his taboo. The Emperor didn't interrogate the fifth prince anymore. He was so angry that he kept pressing his temples with his hand. Take him away first and let him suffer 50 strokes of the plank. After you're done, have him scram to the cold palace and accompany his mother who taught him meticulously. Father, father. The fifth prince was still begging for mercy at first, but after all, his delicate body was precious. After a few strokes of the copper and gold plank, he changed his tune. Not to mention 50 of them, this was simply asking for his life. Beligaju saw this scene and gently played with the porcelain cup in his hand. The corner of his mouth curved up into an evil smile. At that moment, the fifth prince realized that the person he provoked could not only win against him, but could also secretly kill with a borrowed knife. Everything was over. The remaining forces of the Murong family had been completely dug out and replaced with those of Bailey Joju's faction without revealing anything. Only then did the people realize that they didn't know what was going on. The small forces that were scattered in the imperial court for many years had disappeared without the people noticing. Looking at the Dragon War Empire today, except for the power of the 4 big families, the rest had been returned to the royal family. The world was going to change. Hellion Wei Wei listened to the news that was sent back and laughed softly. That's good too. Now that we've beaten one up, Those people who always wanted to laugh at me and His Highness can also live peacefully for a while. Qing Zhon trembled in her heart and whispered, "It's not that simple. The fifth prince is still young, he's still a child. After a few strokes of the plank, the pain on his body is small, but he hasn't completely weaned yet. He feels that he has lost the love of the emperor and has been crying all day long. If he is banished to the cold palace, it would be worse than death." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Qing Zhon, let's talk." "Huh?" Qing Zhon was a little stunned. Hellion Vivian tapped on her head with her finger. "From the moment I met you, I knew that you are soft-hearted, but a good heart should be reserved for someone who is worth it. In this world, if you set someone up, you have to think that you will get retribution one day. We should sympathize with the weak, but if the weak have an arrogant look of 'I am the weak, I am the reasonable one,' and when they hurt others, they cry about how innocent they are, but when they are punished, they feel wronged. Under normal circumstances, I would tell it to get lost from me at all hours of the day and night. Everyone makes mistakes, especially when a person is still young. But if they feel wronged after making a mistake, then I can only laugh. Some people take advantage of their young age to steal other people's husbands, and after they are done, they cry and say that it was the original wife who made trouble for them. If you are soft-hearted to this kind of bitch who pretends to be weak, you are harming your friends." Chapter 440. Qing Zhon listened to Hellion Vivian and opened her mouth. Hellion Vivian glanced at her and continued, "You are now by my side. I don't want my people to have any misunderstandings about His Highness. He is not cold-blooded and heartless, nor does he bully the weak. He just wants to get rid of the other party when he is attacked. In the Dragon War Empire, there are people thinking about how to kill him, no matter in or out of the palace. He is just a little tough, but in your eyes, he is a little evil. You think that the fifth prince is still a child, so he will feel bad if he is treated like this. Then let me ask you, His Highness was also a child. So many people isolated and slandered him, did he not feel bad? He did not even offend anyone at that time. But the fifth prince, who is still a child, has the intention to kill. Now you are telling me that he is too young. So he can stab people at will at a young age, and the people who are stabbed have to thank him? I. Qing Zhon's face and ears turned red after hearing Hellion Wei's words. She felt that her previous thoughts about how pitiful the fifth prince were indeed ridiculous. If the princess consort did not mention it, she would not have understood. Now that the princess consort pointed it out, she only felt that she was simply too stupid. Her cheeks were burning. "Please forgive me, princess consort. I will not think like that again in the future." Hellion Vivian did not say anything. She only felt a pain in her heart. When she was in the modern world, she also encountered such things. From the moment she decided to take revenge, the road was lonely. People sympathized with the weak who would cry out grievances. For Hellion Vivian, people often blamed and ostracized her. But they did not think that if the weak did not do such disgusting things, Hellion Vivian would not have the time to care about her. Just like now, what did Beligaju do wrong? Was it wrong to protect himself? Obviously not. However, even the people who served her felt that he was a little vicious and merciless. Hellion Vivian felt that some things should stop here. Because now she only wanted to wait for him to come back and hug him. Thud. The rain fell. The sky turned gloomy. In the palace of heavenly purity, the emperor listened to the fifth prince's screams outside. He held his teacup and looked at Beligaju for a while before saying, "You gave me this letter so that I can punish your fifth brother. Now that he has been punished, you should be happy." "No." Beligaju faintly blocked the emperor's words. "As a prince, you shouldn't have stretched your hand too far. Isn't it natural for him to be punished? According to him, such a person should be killed. It was just a few beatings. What was there to be happy about? That's just how you are." The emperor sneered, "Not to mention the viciousness of your actions, you even disregard the 6 emotions and use such a method to deal with your brother. You're not afraid. Well, you've never been afraid of anything. You've already stained your hands with blood at such a young age, let alone this time." Bailey Jiaoju raised his hand and took a sip of tea. His voice was slow as he said, Father, you can't just let fifth brother off the hook. If you let him continue, he can drag me down from the position of crown prince sooner. After all, judging from his performance this time, he is definitely more interested in your position than me. After hearing these words, the emperor was angry and annoyed. He coughed violently and quickly picked up the medicinal pills beside him and swallowed a few of them. He could not do anything to Bailey Jiaoju. He could only watch him casually walk out of the palace. It was so irritating. If it were not for the palace servant beside him who was caressing him, he might have swept all the tea sets on the table to the ground. The emperor's reaction was also within Belegaju's expectations. Although they were both sons, there was still a difference between them. That person had always doted on his fifth brother. Now that he had exposed his true colors, the emperor was disappointed and probably hated him even more. After so many years, he had already gotten used to it. Compared to Belegaju's indifference, Hellion Vivian, who rarely got angry, directly flipped the things on the table when she heard the conversation from the Palace of Heavenly Purity. This made Yuan Ming and Xiao Bai, who were in the fantasy space, a little stunned. They had been by this woman's side for a long time. In the past, no matter how big of a problem she encountered, she had never lost her temper like this. Perhaps no one could understand the pain in Hellion Vivian's heart. How could a father talk about his son like this? He was not the one in the wrong. Why should he be blamed? Hellion Vivian clenched her hands and placed them on her lap. Her eyes were colder than ever, so cold that the palace servants did not dare to approach her. This was the scene that Bailey Jiaoju saw when he returned. Eunuch Sun reported in a low voice, "The princess consort already knows about the fifth prince's punishment." Belegaju's fingers suddenly stiffened. He did not want her to see some of his methods, but it was unavoidable. "You!" Belegaju had just opened his mouth. But before he could finish speaking, he was pulled into someone's arms. Although Belegaju did not understand why she would do such a thing, he naturally had to accept her throwing herself into his arms. "What's wrong?" He picked her up and sat her down on the soft couch. Hellion Vivian looked at him and only said a few words, "In the future, if you want to deal with someone, just call me. If anyone dares to bully you, they have to ask if the gun in my hand agrees." As a domineering president, would he allow his other half to suffer such grievances? Definitely not. Belegaju was stunned. He did not expect to hear such words. The corners of his mouth curled up and his eyes were full of warmth. "Are you talking about the emperor?" "Ah, he said those words because he is afraid of me. He hates me in his heart. He can't wait to get rid of me one day. He is afraid that I am too powerful and will affect his position. This time, if it weren't for old Fifth's reach, he wouldn't have been willing to go against his beloved son for me. Otherwise, I'd say this palace is interesting. You guard against this and that, but you've raised an ingrate." Hellion Vivian listened quietly. She had just vented her anger. Her hair was still standing up, so she looked a little confused. Belegaju lowered his head and kissed her long hair. He smiled coldly. "Don't worry. These things are exposed in front of the emperor. He will not be able to sleep well for a month. If the fifth prince does not get rid of him, he will feel like choking. Compared to punishment, this will make him feel more uncomfortable." En. Hellion Wei smiled and glanced at him from the side. After a while, she said, "This method of yours is really ruthless." Hearing this, Belegaju's actions stopped in mid-air as if he was burned by fire. However, Hellion Vivian did not see it. Chapter 441. But unexpectedly. Hellion Vivian's next sentence was, "But, I like it. If you have time, you can teach me. I always feel that my thoughts are not enough in front of you." Bailey Jiaoju looked up and saw a very serious little face. His pale fingers relaxed and he couldn't help but laugh involuntarily, bringing out a mischievous smile. "You also said that your mind isn't enough. How did you learn? It's good to be a little stupid. This way, when you give birth to a son, it will be balanced." Hellion Wei was speechless. In short, what a certain someone meant was that she had lowered the average IQ of the entire family. "If you say it's balanced, then it's balanced. I won't argue with you." Helian Wei leaned back lazily. As if she had thought of something, she smiled and said, I've been liking cats lately. How could Beligaju not understand her meaning? His thin lips moved slightly, and a low voice slowly overflowed, as if deliberately dragging out the tone. Meow. That sound was so good that it made her ears pregnant. Helian Vivian looked at Beligaju's face. That smile that was not a smile easily made people think of the devil deacons in comics. She even had some doubts. Did His Highness have the devil genes in his body? Otherwise, how could it be possible for it to look incomparably holy and yet constantly emit that rich and elegant aura that belonged exclusively to the darkness? He shouldn't be a devil. Sensing Helian Vivian's thoughts, Little White in the fantasy space said, if he is a devil, it's impossible for me not to feel it. That's right, the detection of a holy object towards a devil would be very strong. It might not be able to detect it if it was far away, but it was impossible not to detect it if it was close. Helian Vivian yawned and lazily communicated with Little White, I'm just thinking about it. Not necessarily. At this time, Yuan Ming laughed sinisterly. If it is a real high demon, if he wants to hide, no one will be able to detect it. However, if he is born in the imperial family, the possibility of him falling into the devil's path is very small. But the strange thing is that I found that from the beginning, the retired emperor in the imperial palace was very afraid that the imperial family would fall into the devil's path. So, there must be something we don't know. But Vivian, if you don't want to see the royal lose his humanity one day, you can think of a way to help him wash away some of his evil. He has killed too many people. According to the rules of cultivators, if they personally kill tens of thousands of people, they will one day become a demon. In my opinion, the number of people who have died by his hands is about that many. The bloodthirsty smell on his body has become much stronger since you first came into contact with him, but when he held you, he reached an unprecedented level of peace. This is the most special person I have ever seen. He is both interesting and dangerous. When Helian Vivian heard Yuan Ming's words, her eyes darkened. What do you mean by both interesting and dangerous? It means that if one day he really falls into the devil's path, then no one will be able to stop him. Yuan Ming curved his thin lips, looking as if he was looking forward to it. Helian Vivian frowned, then looked at Beligaju again. Inexplicably, a sentence that she once saw appeared in her mind. That sentence was like this: if I become a Buddha, there will be no demons in the world. If I become a demon, what can Buddha do to me? Beligaju was such an existence. It was as if he should stand there and look down on all living things, high and mighty. When he wore white clothes, he was noble and clean. When he held a booklet in his hand, it was as if he was flipping through ancient Buddhist scriptures. When he wore black clothes, he was evil and dangerous. When his thin lips curved slightly, he let the blood flow freely, as if he was enjoying it. Helian Vivian was not worried that he would fall into the devil's path, but she was concerned about Yuan Ming's words of losing his humanity. She thought about it and decided to go to the hidden spirit temple while she was free these few days. Beligaju naturally did not know that she had made such a decision. His mind was still somewhere else. His voice pulled her thoughts back. Do you not like me to be the emperor? There is nothing to like or dislike. Helian Vivian took his hand and played with it in the palm of her hand. It's just that I was afraid of trouble in the past. For example, if you become the emperor, you will have to sit in the harem of 3,000 beauties. A person like me will never share you with anyone. But the reality is here. If you don't become the emperor, not to mention other people, whether it is the emperor or the fifth prince, they will not tolerate you. So you can do whatever you want. I can help you take the lead. Beligaju's heart warmed when he heard this. He hugged her and whispered, stupid again. Don't you still have Little Chi? Little Chi doesn't want to be the emperor. Helian Vivian's thin lips were half curved. If he became the emperor, he would definitely eat the entire national treasury. The most important thing was that Little Chi liked to fight. With such a small stature sitting on the emperor's throne, it was not funny enough. Beligaju slowly opened his mouth. It is his duty to share the troubles of his elder brother. Being the emperor was a trouble. Helian Vivian was embarrassed. Don't you like to be in power? A man like him, it was impossible that he did not like the feeling of being in power. There are many ways to be in power. You don't have to be the emperor. Bellegaju's voice was slow, as if he was stating a fact. When the time comes, you just need to be the regent. Hellion Vivian finally understood. From the beginning, His Highness had never thought of being the emperor. That was right, it was troublesome to be the emperor. He had to listen to the nagging of those old officials. No matter what he did, he had to bring up the rules of the ancestors. For example, the selection of concubines had broken up the love between the emperor and the empress. If it was just the regent, it would be much easier. Everyone in the world, including the emperor, would have to listen to him. He would not have to wake up early to attend the morning court and would not have to listen to the nagging of others. When the time came, the one who would suffer would be little Chi. Insidious, simply too insidious. Hellion Vivian told Bellegaju her evaluation. Who do you think I am doing this for? As Bellegaju spoke, he hugged Hellion Vivian from behind and pressed her down on the bed. His slender fingers were not idle. Hellion Vivian saw that the sky was still bright outside and wanted to stand up, but he held her wrist. She had no choice but to reason with him. It is just past noon and such a big thing has happened. There must be officials who want to see you. What if someone comes in later? Then let them wait. Bailey Georgiou's eyes darkened as he planted a kiss on her slightly flustered face. His hand slid down gently, feeling the delicacy of her fingertips that he liked the most. He leaned over and whispered into Hellion Wei's ear, "What's more important than carrying on the royal family's ancestral line, Hearing those words, Hellion Vivian's ears burned. Seeing that he really slid his hand in, her body trembled. Don't, outside, there are people standing outside, they can hear. Chapter 442. Which time did they not hear us at night? Bellegaju smiled evilly. If you don't want them to hear you, just follow my lead and moan softly. Hellion Vivian didn't know that from the beginning, Bellegaju didn't want her voice to be heard. As soon as he entered the bedroom, he ordered Eunuch Sun to withdraw all the palace servants outside because he didn't want her voice to be heard. Hellion Vivian didn't know about this. In order not to be heard, she could only bite her thin lips until they turned red. Her eyes were filled with thick mist. Perceiving her thoughts, Bailey Georgiou laughed lowly and sent that seductive and deep laughter into Hellion Wei's small mouth through their intertwined lips. At the same time, his large palm seemed to be kind enough to support her. At the same time, his waist heavily pushed against her. The heat from their close contact penetrated through their clothes and made Hellion Wei tremble fiercely. You really don't want to moan? For Hellion Vivian, that kind of collision was simply destructive. Her fingers couldn't help but clench the tiger skin on the bed. Don't do this. Don't do what? Bellegaju suddenly stopped. There was a hint of suppression in his eyes. Otherwise, I'll let you move by yourself. As he spoke, his large palm exerted force and made Hellion Wei sit on his waist. Looking at that silk-like black hair falling down, swaying in an arc that made one's heart itch, his pair of eyes deepened even more. His fingertips elegantly lifted her long hair and his teeth bit her earlobe. Why don't you move? Don't want it. Or is it too comfortable? Hellion Wei sensed that the burning sensation buried within her was getting bigger and bigger. Occasionally, it would stir up a person's body and make them go limp and numb. Unfortunately, he kept saying those kinds of shameful words beside her ear. Her whole body felt as if it was on fire, especially when she was looking down at that face that was already dyed with a bit of color because of love. His eyes were like splashed ink, pure and noble. A wisp of hair on his forehead just happened to fall on the corner of his lips, tickling her heart slightly, making her want to go up and lick it. Who knew that when she just grabbed Bellegaju's collar, her eyes were dazzled. It was a bone-eroding resistance. That person reached in with a hand, slowly moving around and kneading. The feeling of ecstasy made her mind blank. Hellion Vivian still had a trace of rationality. She heard someone shouting outside, "Your Highness, Lord Zhong wants to see you." Hellion Vivian wanted him to stop, but he simply took advantage of that position and pressed his big palm on her back, starting a series of strength. Your Highness. Lord Zhong also didn't have good eyesight. He couldn't hear the movement inside and still wanted to wait outside. Eunuch Sun's heart was like a mirror. He said in a low voice, "Lord, you should go back first. I think His Highness is busy right now." Lord Jong didn't give up and called out again, "Your Highness." He heard an echo, but that voice was too hoarse. "Send Lord Jong out." It was just 6 words, but Lord Jong's whole body shivered. He asked Eunuch Sun doubtfully, "What's wrong with His Highness? Is he sick?" "Lord Jong, it's better not to ask. Please go back first." Eunuch Sun answered vaguely. Gradually, Hellion Vivian could no longer hear the movement. However, she was worried that a second person would come, so she could only whisper to him to hurry up. Belegaju smiled evilly. His long and narrow phoenix eyes couldn't help but shine with a beautiful light. His thin lips moved down, and his sharp teeth bit through the obstructing clothes, leaving a burning mark on her left breast. "Don't touch that." Hellion Vivian felt that even her fingertips were numb. Her voice was panting and slightly weak. "Don't." Belegaju seemed to be extremely rough as he leaned over and bit her neck, but he didn't hurt her. His throat let out a low laugh. "Didn't you want me to hurry up?" After he finished speaking, there was a slow and gentle touch. Hellion Vivian couldn't bear this at all. Her fingers couldn't help but tighten. Her whole body was burning. In the end, she let out a broken and hoarse voice. Give me. Say that you are mine." Belegaju moved closer to her ear and slowly guided, "Say it, and I will give it to you." Hellion Vivian's eyes turned red. I am yours." "Good girl." Belegaju kissed her lips. He didn't restrain himself anymore, and crazily attacked her. In the large bedroom, other than the sound of collision, there was also the sound of enchanting and moving moans. It wasn't until dinner time that the room finally quieted down. Belegaju asked Eunuch Sun to bring the servants in and put in a bucket of rose water. He personally washed Hellion Vivian's body. Then, he carried her to the wooden table and asked her in a low voice, "What do you want to eat?" Hellion Vivian didn't have the strength to eat. Her stomach was very hungry. Her eyes lit up as she looked at the dishes. Every one of them was her favorite. Everything he did seemed natural. He took a pair of bamboo chopsticks from the servant's hand and put a piece of spicy pork ribs next to her mouth. Hellion Vivian took a bite. Her mouth was full of fragrance. After eating a piece, she ate the spicy diced chicken. Even the tea was fed to her by a certain highness. But this time, the tea seemed a bit different. She smacked the taste in her mouth. It was probably because something had been added. "What is this water?" Eunuch Sun was preparing the dishes at the side. Now that he heard Hellion Vivian ask, he excitedly replied, "This is what the retired emperor asked this old servant to prepare. After drinking this, I guarantee that within half a month, the princess will be able to give birth to a dragon child. Shouldn't things like giving birth depend on the man's ability?" Hellion Vivian didn't want to be a guinea pig who was fed medicine every day. Based on the knowledge she learned in the 21st century, she planned to refute Eunuch Sunday, who knew that as soon as she finished speaking, Eunuch Sun immediately said, "Princess, you don't have to worry about this. We also prepared something for the prince. After drinking it, I guarantee that he will definitely be enthusiastic." Wait, why did she feel that the direction of this topic was a bit wrong? Hellion Vivian bit the pork ribs and was about to ask Eunuch Sun to change the topic. But then she heard Belegaju slowly say in her ear, "It seems that I should find a time to properly prove my ability. Otherwise, how can I show my enthusiasm? Don't you think so, madam?" Hellion Vivian. They couldn't wait to do it every day. It was just like what was written in the previous contract of marriage. There was no rest. How could he be enthusiastic? We have done it enough times. Hellion Vivian looked at Belegaju warningly. "Don't think that I will fall into his trap." Belegaju slowly smiled and used a voice that only the two of them could hear. He said in Hellion Vivian's ear, "Madam, and I agree on this point. I also feel that the number of times is not a problem, but..." Chapter 443. Our problem is that we should try it in other places. For example, the South study that you find the most exciting. Belegaju continued, his gaze deep and meaningful. Hellion Vivian was speechless. The royal's black-bellied nature had begun to seep into his words and actions. Hellion Vivian couldn't win against him every time, so she simply lowered her head and ate silently. As she ate, she comforted herself that even the overbearing president had to give in to his other half. She couldn't be an exception. Eunuch Sun didn't know what the two masters were talking about, but when he saw the two of them talking and laughing, he felt that it would be good if the days continued like this. His Highness was smiling more and more. Not only did the relationship between the young couple not have any problems because of this instigation, it made people feel more comfortable to look at. It seemed that the day to welcome the little Highness was not far away. Eunuch Sun thought happily. He was like a busy little bee, happily arranging the dishes. After he was done, he returned to report to the retired emperor. When the retired emperor heard this, he smiled deeply and drank a mouthful of tea. He kept saying, "That's good, that's good." In this servant's opinion, His Highness doesn't have that girl surnamed Yoon in his heart at all. Eunuch Sun thought of the past and looked at the present. He said firmly, "Maybe there's some misunderstanding." After the retired emperor heard this, the smile on his face sank. Although Jua doesn't show anything on the surface, he cares a lot about how his mother treated him in the past. After all, she's his biological mother and he always wants to be close to her. This emperor still remembers that Jua wasn't as old as little Seven at that time. He was less than 3 years old, but he already knew how to walk on his own. He took the reward and wanted to give it to his mother, but was kicked out by her. He asked this emperor, "Grandfather, did I do something wrong? Is that why mother doesn't like me?" "Old son, you don't know how sad my heart was when the child asked me this question." That girl with the surname Yoon was left behind by his empress mother. She even looked somewhat similar to his empress mother. He will always leave her some face, but this emperor is worried that the divine monk's prophecy. Is the retired emperor afraid that His Highness will fall into the demonic path? Eunuch Sun lowered his voice and said, "This old servant sees that His Highness has restrained himself a lot. With Wang Fei here, he will have misgivings." The retired emperor put down the teacup in his hand and looked into the distance. How can that be called scruples? It's more like his hiding it even deeper. Just a while ago, those people who said that Wei Wei was a femme fatale were all eliminated by him. More than half of the palace servants who had been serving him recently had also disappeared. If it wasn't for me, he could even hide it from me. Old son, I'm already an old man, and I only have a few breaths left to live. Remember, if one day, he really shows signs of falling into the devil's path, then do something about it. That's my imperial grandson. I can't bear to see those people from the 4 great clans drag him out, treat him like a monster, and besiege him. His pride did not allow him to have a trace of impurity, let alone lose all of his humanity. Even if it wasn't for him, this emperor still has to think about the people of the War Dragon Empire. The imperial family falling into the devil's path is a path of no return. This old servant. Eunuch Sun looked at the retired emperor's exhausted face and his voice choked for a moment before he said, "Yes, your majesty. Come out." With the 5th prince locked up like this, the situation in the imperial court changed again. Especially on the 4 great clans side, they had originally pinned their hopes on the 5th prince. After all, he had been doted on by the emperor for a long time. With his identity as a prince, he could compete with Beligaju. If the 5th prince became the emperor, they would only have one more puppet to help them sweep the world. At that time, they could suck as much blood of spirit beasts as they wanted. They didn't have to worry about anything at all. Just like now, the reason why they were so unbridled was because they had lured the current emperor into concocting pills from the very beginning. So what if that person was the emperor? All they wanted was an endless life. But now, things were getting more and more out of their control. In addition, the War Dragon army had been secretly investigating something. Their hands and feet were tied when they did things, and they were very unhappy. If this goes on, when will we be able to live forever? The eyes of the priest clan's elder, who was wearing a holy robe, turned abnormally red. However, he didn't seem to notice it. He reached out and touched his face. "I don't want to go back to my previous skinny appearance." "It's not just you. We don't want to either." The dragon head walking stick leaned on the ground. The faces of the other 3 elders were gloomy as if they hadn't slept for a few days. The blood of the sacred beasts is running out. We have to find something to replace it. I heard that the blood of a baby can retain one's youthful appearance. I wonder if it works. Of course, but you can't do it with great fanfare. A deep voice sounded from behind the beaded curtain. It was elegant and gentle, and the fragrance of tea filled the air. At present, I still need you to create more resentment. As long as you can break the seal, not only will the dragon god belong to us, but you will also naturally obtain the eternal life you want. Hearing this, the elder's eyes were filled with unprecedented greed. Then what should we do now? I have something here. The man in white stood up and placed the wooden comb in the hands of one of the elders. You just need to send it to the palace, near where Helion Wei lives. Then, it will be effective. The elders put away the wooden combs, their faces carrying deep and shallow smiles. However, no one knew that just as they were looking forward to eternal life, an invisible shadow was feeding on the greed in their hearts. It was growing bit by bit, and when it grew to a certain extent, it would be able to take over the original owner and replace him. At this moment, in the general's residence, Yun Biluo, who was wearing a cloak, handed a letter to a servant. The letter indicated that Helion Guang Yarrow and Su Yang Mo should receive it. After reading the letter, Su Yang Mo sneered, "This bastard is getting more and more capable." "Why?" Helion Guang Yarrow took the letter and glanced at it. His eyes were filled with venom as he said, "The royal family has always been insidious. This time, they might not be helping that bastard, but they can be so ruthless to their own brother. He will definitely be known as an extremely cruel person in the future. When the retired emperor wants him to take over the throne, he will have to think twice." Su Yang Mo narrowed her eyes. "It's these 2 people who forced our daughter into a dead end. I must avenge this. Don't worry, I have arranged for the clan meeting. The hidden army will also send a representative. When the time comes." Chapter 444. She will definitely lose. Helion Guang Yarrow's fingers tightened around the letter. Although he no longer had any feelings for Su Yang Mo, he still had to avenge his beloved daughter. Moreover, he could not let Helion Vivian continue to change. If he did not stop it, he was really worried that the little bastard would climb over his head one day. Therefore, before she became the empress, she had to be completely removed from the family. Then, is it true that the bastard has been possessed? Helion Guang Yarrow asked Su Yang Mo. Su Yang Mo sneered, "Most likely. If we can find a way to extract her soul from her body, then no matter how many tricks she has up her sleeve, she can only await death obediently. You have to think of a way in this regard." Helion Guang Yarrow said as he stood up, "I will go out for a while to finalize the hidden army." When Su Yang Mo heard the hidden army, it was as if she had heard the news of Helion Vivian being expelled from the family like a stray dog. She told herself that soon, in another 2 to 3 days, the little bastard would be utterly defeated. It was night time. As the moon swayed, Helion Vivian listened to the subordinates' report indifferently. Her thin lips slowly curled up. "Luckily, they missed me so much. Tell Kai Yang that we can contact him now." "Yes." The mercenaries retreated. Hua Rong's palace was silent again. Beligaju, who was sitting on the soft couch, did not seem to hear the conversation between the 2 of them. His legs were slightly crossed as he flipped through the ancient scroll in his hand. When he saw Helion Vivian walking in, he hooked his finger at her. "Come here." At first, Helion Vivian thought that he was finally going to scold her. However, Beligaju said, "I have a gift for you." "What gift?" Helion Vivian subconsciously took a step back. This was not her fault. Every gift that the royal gave her was not inhumane at all. For example, the collar on her neck. What was he going to give her this time? Cat ears. Helion Vivian's mouth twitched. A woman walked in from the outside. That woman was very beautiful and had an exquisite figure. She wore clothes that still retained her charm. When she landed on the ground, she knelt down and said in a bone-piercing voice, "This servant greets the princess." Helion Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked at Beligaju lazily. She chuckled and said, "Give me a girl." "Your Highness, I don't have any feelings for women." Why don't you give me a man? When Beligaju heard this, his eyes turned cold. Why would I give you a man? Oh no, I accidentally stepped on the tiger's fur. Hellion Vivian felt the increasing strength around her waist. She felt a little guilty. Just taking a look. Take a look. Beligaju sneered. Hellion Vivian. Otherwise, he wouldn't have let her touch him. It seems that Madam thinks that I'm not handsome enough and wants to find another man to take a look. Beligaju lifted her chin with his fingers and looked at her. You can go and look. Let's see if you're faster at finding people or if I'm faster at killing people. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile. Then I'd better not look. I think that no one is better looking than you. Beligaju's fingers paused. Hellion Vivian felt his movements and felt a sense of accomplishment. Ha 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 ha, she finally succeeded in teasing him for once. You're so superficial that you only know how to look at people's appearance. Beligaju pulled her over and interlocked their fingers. His tone was not as cold as before. Hellion Vivian admitted that she was a fan of appearance, but other than appearance, she also looked at temperament, character, and cultivation. Although the royal family never had the last two things. But unfortunately, his appearance accounted for more than 99% of it. Hellion Wei Wei always felt that such a handsome face, coupled with the fact that it would brainwash her from time to time with a meow woof, he deserved to be forgiven no matter what he did. Even if he was shameless at times, she wasn't any better herself. The two of them just happened to be in cahoots. The woman kneeling on the ground bit her thin lips. She had never seen His Highness dote on anyone so much. Originally, she thought that a person like His Highness would not have 7 emotions and 6 desires. He was suitable to sit high and mighty on the dragon throne, ruling over the country. But now, Hellion Vivian looked at the woman's eyes and couldn't help but frown. Here it comes again. It seemed that among the women who stayed by Bailey Georgiou's side, very few would not fall for him. Hellion Vivian could understand these things. In the Tang sect, there was once a shadow who had a crush on young Master Tang. But from the beginning, young Master Tang had told them that he would treat anyone who dared to have improper thoughts about him to a bullet. At that time, she thought it was just a joke. Who would have thought that a shadow would really enter his room while he was drunk? But at that time, she stopped breathing. They did not do anything. But they also touched young Master Tang's bottom line. Hellion Vivian had never seen such a gloomy young Master Tang. For many years, that person had been autistic when he was young. After he grew up, he went to various famous places with a faint smile on his face. He was called the Smiling Fox. He never lost his temper easily, but that day, he broke countless wine glasses with a wave of his hand. He sneered as he watched the people send the shadow out. His voice was sinister. No one can make me wrong, my girl. Remember, only this once. Hellion Vivian realized that he was keeping his chastity for one person. And he would call that person my girl, but even so, it didn't stop some people from secretly liking him. Presumably, Beligaju's situation was the same. Hellion Vivian chuckled as she looked at the girl kneeling in front of her. Her eyes did not leave her at all. Lan Lian, whose thoughts were seen through, suddenly froze. She lowered her eyes, faintly feeling uneasy. It was good that she knew she was uneasy. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. Your Highness, what do you want to do by giving me a girl? Beligaju did not speak. He only glanced at Lan Lian, who had already stood up. Lan Lian immediately said in a gentle voice, Princess Consort, this servant has been by Hellion Daren's side all this time. I know Hellion Daren's every move like the back of my hand. He promised me that when the clan meeting is over, I will marry into the defense division. Marry into the general's residence. Wouldn't Su Yang Mo be angered to death? There was no need for further explanation as Hellion Wei Wei understood the reason behind it. She turned her head and looked at Bailey Georgiou. Was it you who asked Lan Lian to approach Hellion Guang Yarrow on purpose? Beligaju's voice was calm. Is there a need for someone like Hellion Guang Yarrow to do it on purpose? Hellion Vivian smiled and said, although he is a beast, he still has a mind of his own. Lan Lian is indeed good to be able to get close to him. Your servant is just following your Highness' orders. Chapter 445. Lan Lian did not understand what Helian Vivian meant. She must have seen through her intentions. That was why she purposely showed off her cleverness in front of His Highness. She wanted His Highness to let her leave. Lan Lian's eyes dimmed as she thought of this. She continued, "Princess Consort, you flatter me." It turned out that Lan Lian was overthinking things. Helian Vivian did not think as much as her. She was only thinking about this matter. She tapped her finger on the table beside her. "The day after tomorrow, you will go to the clan meeting with me. Tell them about what happened between you and Helian Guang Yarrow. There shouldn't be a problem, right?" "Yes." Lan Lian lowered her head again. Her voice was a little unsure. "No problem." Helian Wei picked up a teacup and spun it between her fingers. "I'm a person who doesn't like to force others to do things. Answer me after you've thought it through. If you really admit to having a relationship with Helian Guang Yarrow in public, your reputation will be ruined." Lan Lian raised her beautiful eyes slightly and looked at Bailey Jiaoju with fluctuating eyes. However, that person did not even look at her. He did not even look at her. Lan Lian could not help but feel disappointed, but the love in her eyes did not diminish. "Princess Consort, this is a mission given to me by His Highness. As long as it is an order from His Highness, I will do my best to complete it. What's more, my reputation will be ruined." These words were obviously directed at Helian Vivian. She was telling Helian Vivian about her sacrifice and her unwillingness to give up. At this moment, Beligaju seemed to have her in his eyes. However, after hearing these words, his beautiful eyebrows furrowed slightly. As the person involved, Helian Vivian only curved her thin lips and said to Beligaju, "You go out. I have something to tell Lan Lian in private." "I go out." Beligaju's eyes darkened. He only had one thought now, and that was to kill Lan Lian. Why did these people have to act as if there was something going on between them in front of her? A vicious aura emerged from his eyes, so piercing that it pierced the bones. Lan Lian's body trembled as her face paled. How could she forget about His Highness' temper? "You want to kill someone in front of me?" Helian Vivian smiled and squeezed his hand. However, in the blink of an eye, Beligaju resumed his half-smile. He picked her up and said gently, "How could that be? Don't always misunderstand your husband." Helian Vivian. Misunderstanding? If she didn't reach out to stop him, she was afraid that the person standing in front of her would be a corpse. "Also, you can say whatever you want. You can pretend that I don't exist." Beligaju lowered his head and kissed her forehead. Helian Vivian was helpless. He was so tall and had such a strong aura. How could she ignore his existence? Beligaju's thin lips curled up. He removed her hand from her forehead and continued, "If there's anything that you can't explain clearly during your conversation, wouldn't you be wrongly accusing your husband? We haven't even started talking yet." Where did the word wrongly come from? Helian Vivian sighed, "Forget it. Lan Lian, you can leave first. I'll talk to you again when I have time." "Yes." Lan Lian responded as if she had just escaped a calamity. She really didn't want His Highness to know about the love that she had kept hidden for a long time. However, Beligaju's voice rang out at this time, "Since you don't want to talk to her, I'll do it." As he spoke, he coldly looked towards Lan Lian. Lan Lian's body immediately stiffened and she knelt on the ground with a thud. Beligaju walked towards her in a somewhat absent-minded manner. "Do you like me?" Lan Lian abruptly raised her head as her face burned. This subordinate. This Highness doesn't like you." Beligaju didn't wait for her to finish before he spoke in an indifferent tone. "This Highness has never done anything to make you think that I'm interested in you." Lan Lian bit her thin lips, wanting to explain. Beligaju didn't give her any chance to speak. "Now, tell me properly. What were you trying to prove with your words just now?" This subordinate wasn't trying to prove anything. Lan Lian's tears began to flow. "I was just speaking the truth." Beligaju swept a glance at her and smiled evilly. "Speaking the truth? Do you take this Highness for a fool? It seems that this Highness' methods have been too gentle recently. That's why people like you have misconceptions that you shouldn't have." "Your Highness." Lan Lian choked with sobs. Her enchanting eyes were stained with tears. This subordinate really likes you. Just based on this point, does this subordinate deserve to die? In any case, she had already come to this point. She might as well say it all out. Beligaju didn't say anything else. A gloomy look slid from the corner of his eyes and turned into a black fog. He didn't want to kill anyone in front of this little thing, but these people just had to be so blind. There's nothing wrong with liking someone. Hellion Vivian reached out to hold Beligaju's wrist as she spoke in a calm voice. What's wrong is that the person you like already has a family. It's fine if you don't give up, but you still dare to provoke me in front of my face. Lan Lian, only love that doesn't hurt a third person is called love. Any attempt to interfere with other people's thoughts isn't called disregarding one's own safety, it's called making a fool of oneself. If Beligaju also likes you and has expressed his feelings for you, then it takes two hands to clap. You should take him away. I, Hellion Vivian, never want a man who's half-hearted. Now that I'm together with my husband, you still want to interfere. Haha, Lan Lian, I don't care who you like in your heart because that's your own business. But if you don't have boundaries, I can immediately make you pack up your things and get out of the palace. I have 100 ways to make a mistress suffer a fate worse than death. Do you want to try it? It's better for you to put away all those thoughts and be a good servant. If a woman wasn't ruthless, her status wouldn't be stable. This was a sentence that Hellion Vivian deeply believed in. Just like what she said, she wouldn't stop anyone from liking Beligaju. After all, that was the right of others. But after provoking her, she still felt wronged. She didn't mind letting her have a taste of her method. If Beligaju was also involved in this, then she wouldn't even care about this matter. She would just let go and leave. It was probably because her father was snatched away by a mistress. She had suffered from emotional cleanliness since she was young. Either one of them would grow old together, or she would stay where she was. She was a person who couldn't rub sand in her eyes. It had always been like this. Almost all of Lan Lian's thoughts were seen through by Hellion Vivian, which made her feel an unusual sense of shame and fear. Only now did she understand why His Highness had come over. He really wanted to kill her. If it wasn't for the new princess stopping him, she was afraid that her blood would immediately splatter. What others could see through, His Highness would naturally see through as well. Chapter 446. She was too stupid to provoke the Princess Consort verbally, but she forgot that His Highness could see through it too. His Highness had clearly expressed that he didn't like her. Come to think of it, he had never looked at her more than once. This time, if she hadn't been given the task to lie in ambush beside Hellion Guangyaro, he wouldn't even have been able to call her name. Whether it was her or Hei Zhu, they were just code names in his eyes. Thinking of this, Lan Lian knelt on the ground, as if she had suddenly recognized her duty. She kowtowed loudly, "Princess Consort, I won't dare to do it again. Please give this subordinate another chance, Princess Consort and His Highness. From today onwards, this subordinate will be a good subordinate's Deadpool. I won't have any improper thoughts. That man who was as unattainable as the moon was not hers. No matter how good that person was, he was different from the other members of the royal family. He was already someone else's. She had been in contact with so many men, no matter how heroic they were just lechers who abandoned their wives. Only His Highness was different. Perhaps, this was the reason why she liked His Highness. However, it was too late. She didn't believe that the Princess Consort would keep her, a servant who had designs on His Highness, in the palace. The Princess Consort was magnanimous enough to stop His Highness from killing her. Asking her to stay was simply a fantasy. She reckoned that the Princess Consort would find an excuse to send her away. Lan Lian bowed her head and smiled bitterly. But what she didn't expect was that Hellion Vivian actually replied with a faint hum. Lan Lian looked up in disbelief, her eyes swaying back and forth. Beligaju was obviously not satisfied with this decision. His fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's wrist, warning her. Hellion Vivian knew that this guy needed to be comforted, so she stood on her tiptoes and patted his head, meaning to say, "Good boy." Beligaju was amused. Did she really think of him as a cat or a dog? Lan Lian was deeply shocked. Why? Why do you want me to stay? She didn't think that Hellion Vivian was kind-hearted. After hearing her words just now, she knew that she wasn't that easy to bully. Only those who like him can risk their lives to protect him. Hellion Vivian's voice sounded a little faint as she said, "Actually, I can let you go. However, once you leave this palace, firstly, you will harbor resentment. Secondly, I'm afraid that he will make a move before I can make a move. His hands are stained with too much blood, it's better to reduce it." In the end, every consideration was for His Highness. When Lan Lian heard Hellion Vivian's words, she finally understood why she had lost. Compared to Wang Fei, her love was so thin that it wasn't even worth mentioning. She had always thought that she was smart. But now, when she saw Hellion Vivian lazily leaning against His Highness like a cat, she realized that her cultivation was too shallow. If it was said that before, she still had the thought of waiting for His Highness to look back and take a good look at her. But now, she didn't have such thoughts at all. She didn't have Hellion Vivian's boldness. When she stood beside His Highness, her heart was beating rapidly, but at the same time, she was afraid of him. After all, accompanying the Emperor was like accompanying a tiger. However, Hellion Vivian didn't. That woman was almost as dazzling as His Highness. Just this conversation today, she said so much just to leave a good reputation for His Highness. Lan Lian admitted that she couldn't do this because she didn't even think of that level. In other words, she only cared about whether she could get it or not, and never considered His Highness. Hellion Vivian, she was indeed the successor of the Hellion family who could resurrect the Hellion family. Wang Fei. Lan Lian looked up, her eyes were filled with voluntary submission. "Please bring me along when you attend the clan meeting. I have a way to help you deal with Hellion Guangyao." Hellion Vivian looked at her and smiled. "I don't need you to deal with Hellion Guangyao." Lan Lian's fingers stiffened, and she said with difficulty, "Wang Fei, do you still not believe me? Do you think that I changed too quickly? I just suddenly thought it through. No." Before Lan Lian could finish, Hellion Vivian yawned and said, "It's true that you don't have to deal with Hellion Guangyao. I have a way to deal with him. You have to deal with someone else. When the time comes, there will be a lot of dog blood. It will be more exciting." Lan Lian's eyes lit up. Wang Fei, you mean to say that you've decided to bring me to the clan meeting?" "Yes," Hellion Vivian replied slowly, looking like she was sleepy, her eyelids drooping. Lan Lian knew that it was not suitable for her to stay any longer, so she left respectfully. Ever since then, her impression of Hellion Vivian had changed, and she would praise Hellion Vivian to everyone she met. Belegaju's heart was very warm. Previously, he thought that this gift was purely to create trouble for him. Until he heard Hellion Vivian's words, the beast in his heart seemed to be controlled. She tried her best to keep his hands clean. The next time he killed someone, he might consider sparing their lives. "Why aren't you talking?" Hellion Wei was so sleepy that she couldn't take it anymore. She buried her head in his shoulder and rubbed her face back and forth. Then, she shook her furry head to make herself look smarter. Belegaju reached out and carried her horizontally, his voice faint, "If you're sleepy, just sleep. Why do you keep shaking your head?" Hellion Vivian felt very comfortable in such an embrace, so she closed her eyes after a while. She realized that he had put her on the bed, so she subconsciously reached out and grabbed his sleeve. Her mouth unconsciously said, "No, I want to sleep." Bailey Jiu stared blankly for a moment. He laughed in spite of himself and kissed her ear. I won't touch you. When you wake up, lift your arms first. Don't sleep in a coat. It's uncomfortable." Hellion Wei actually cooperated. She took off her outerwear and comfortably sank into his chest that smelled like sandalwood. Belegaju reached out and hugged her, resting his chin on her head and gently rubbing it. There was a faint smile on his face, which was unprecedentedly gentle and dangerous. What to do? He couldn't let go of this person in his arms. If one day he fell into hell, he wanted to pull her down with him. People said that too many feelings were to fulfill one's wish. But he just wanted to hold this person tight, hold her tight forever. Belegaju took a deep breath and suppressed the fog in his eyes. Belegaju took a deep breath and suppressed the fog in his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, they were pure and holy. He lifted her chin and kissed the corner of her lips. Don't ever betray me. Never ever. Chapter 447. After saying that, Bellegaju's fingers stiffened. Then, he immediately frowned and said, "Come out." Fire Chaline's figure appeared faintly. It looked at Bellegaju worriedly and said, "Master, your aura. It will be fine in 2 days." Bailey Jiaoju seemed to know what it was going to say. Without waiting for Fire Chaline, he cut it off. He tilted his head and draped his outer robe over Helian Wei Wei's body before he slowly stood up. Fire Chaline didn't relax its vigilance because of this. Was it just an illusion? Why did it feel that the smell of blood on its master had increased a lot recently? It didn't know if this news was good or bad for its master. It only knew one thing, and that was that nothing must happen to Helian Vivian. If something happened to Helian Vivian, its master who lost his soul fragment would definitely lose his humanity. It had to find the last soul fragment as soon as possible before the seal was completely destroyed. The strange thing was that even if it opened its all-seeing eye and recovered to its previous level, it still couldn't see the information of its master's last soul fragment. It didn't know what happened to its master at that time. The only thing it was sure of was that it knew better than the green dragon and the sky-devouring beast that its master didn't die. It was just that he chose to sleep. Or maybe it was because of some reason that he fell into a deep sleep. In order to not be found by anyone, its master scattered his soul everywhere. His main soul entered the path of reincarnation. At that time, it was severely injured and couldn't find any trace of its master. Because it was its master's contracted divine beast and its master specially gave it guidance, it found its master after 1,000 years. Now, the green dragon was locked in the green dragon lake. It couldn't appear. Once it appeared around the green dragon, they were incompatible like fire and water. Without its master, it would definitely create a great war between humans. The only one who could suppress this matter, the sky-devouring beast, was nowhere to be found. The sky-devouring beast was different from them. Its fate with its master was innate. Logically speaking, wherever its master appeared, the sky-devouring beast would definitely appear. Why couldn't it sense the sky-devouring beast's aura after so many years? Could it be that it was already dead? Or perhaps they were locked up in some place? Or was it because Master's soul was not complete, so he could not summon him? Even now, the Fire Chaline still couldn't make sense of this. His eyes darkened, and he decided to make a trip to the demon area. Because it was not sure what the last piece of its master's soul was, night fell. Helian Vivian started having nightmares again. The scenery in the dream was the same, and so were the people. However, this time, the Helian Vivian was clearly much better than before. She was no longer as thin and transparent as before, as if a gust of wind could blow her away. It was as if it was slowly materializing. Even his fingers felt slightly cold. The moment she touched Helian Vivian's neck, she was shaken awake by Bellegaju. He looked at her with eyes as dark as the night, with a breath that made people feel at ease. "You have been having nightmares recently. Are you not used to sleeping in the palace?" "A little." It was unknown who had said that the imperial palace was the place with the heaviest resentment. People with poor birth characters should never enter the imperial palace at night. In the imperial palace, there were countless palace servants who had jumped into the river, not to mention those concubines who had framed each other. None of them knew how they had died. If the resentment was too heavy, it was not a good thing for Helian Vivian. She was a person who had been possessed. The resentment seemed to be able to affect the Helian Vivian in the dream. It was a bit like feeding her nutrients. Helian Vivian thought of this. Her eyes narrowed, and she reached out to pour herself a cup of water. When she looked up, she found that he had already picked up the teacup on the bedside and put it to her lips. Helian Vivian smiled, lowered her head, and drank 2 mouthfuls. Bellegaju put down the teacup in his hand, then took out a handkerchief to help her wipe the sweat on the corner of her mouth and forehead. Helian Vivian didn't want to wipe it, so she moved away from his hand. She buried her face in his arms, rubbed against him, and fell asleep again. This time, there were no nightmares. When she woke up, there were obvious water stains on Bellegaju's clothes. Helian Vivian looked at the handsome face that was still in deep sleep, then looked at the water stains. She decisively chose to escape at the last minute. Based on His Highness's degree of misophobia, the first thing he would do when he woke up was to grab her, pin her down on the soft bed, and teach her a lesson. She still had to attend the clan meeting in the afternoon, so she couldn't waste her energy on this kind of thing. Hellion Vivian had a good idea. Her feet were nimble, and she didn't make much noise. But just as she took the outer garment, she heard the person behind her ask, "Where are you going?" Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. She felt someone holding her waist from behind. Probably because he had just woken up, his voice sounded deeper and hoarser than usual. "You dirted my clothes, and you want to escape. I want to prepare breakfast for you." Hellion Vivian smiled faintly, and said very naturally. Beligaju looked at her, then suddenly turned his face and kissed her most sensitive ear. Hellion Vivian shivered, and the big hand that was holding her pulled her back to the bed. "Instead of running away, why don't you let me punish you first, then I'll find an excuse to let you go tonight." "I am." Just like that, Hellion Wei Wei was pressed into the crimson quilt. Thousands of black strands fell down, matching her face that was dyed crimson. It was extremely beautiful. What Bailey Jiaoju liked the most was none other than this appearance of hers. He watched as her thin lips slightly opened and lightly panted. He slowly tore apart that obstructing long skirt and forcefully broke in with his waist. Compared to before, the two of them were more and more compatible. Every time they made love, they could bring extreme pleasure to each other. His Highness was a man of his word. Just like he said, he would punish her once. But this time, it took too long. Hellion Wei Wei did not know how many times she had almost cried out when she was knocked into. Maybe it was because of the morning, but His Highness was more than a little energetic. Outside, someone was already calling out to Hellion Wei Wei with a puzzled tone, "Princess Consort? Are you inside, or have you left?" Strange, at this time, His Highness should have gone to morning court. Furthermore, Wang Fei had clearly instructed him to wake her up when it was time because Wang Fei still had important matters to attend to. Why was it that no one responded to him now? That young eunuch couldn't keep standing at the entrance of the palace, so he raised his voice and said, "Then, Princess Consort, this servant will first send this person away." Wait a minute. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,